Chapter 84. I've been thinking about you a lot these days. Fan Xian ignored her and continued, ever since I saw you at the Temple of Qing, I've been wanting to see you. Lin Wanner was embarrassed. What nonsense are you talking about? She gritted her teeth. I'm already engaged. Besides, how could you sneak into a girl's room in the middle of the night? That's impudent and rude. You're engaged to the Fan family. I know. Fan Xian looked at her with a smile. Lin Wanner thought of the first time she met this young man. She thought of the complicated feelings they had when they looked at each other in silence. She felt a pang of pain in her heart. Since you know, why haven't you left? Do you really want someone to kill you? Fan Xian stopped teasing her. He looked at her and said seriously, I am Fan Xian. The deathly silence went on for who knew how long. Fan Xian felt a little awkward. He saw a tear fall from the corner of Lin Wanner's eye. She quickly wiped it away and said in a low voice, Mister, please behave yourself. Fan Xian smiled bitterly. I'm telling the truth. What do I have to do to make you believe me? Lin Wanner looked at his face. After a long moment of silence, she said in a low voice, You are Mr. Fan? Fan Xian smiled and nodded, but Miss Lin still had a look of disbelief on her face. The moon in the sky had long since broken free from the shackles of the clouds, revealing its bright and beautiful face. Its faint light shone on the earth, and some light shone through the window, illuminating the man and woman on and under the bed. It really is me, Fan Xian said softly. Wanner couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her emotions were in turmoil and she couldn't help but start coughing. She didn't even know where the sword in her hand had gone. As she coughed, she asked, You're the Fan family's underground fighter? Fan Xian couldn't help but laugh. Seeing how weak she looked, he felt sorry for her and reached out to hold her wrist. He passed some jinqi into her body and carefully adjusted her pulse. Hearing the words underground boxing, he laughed bitterly. I only did it twice. Lin Wanner gradually began to believe him. Happiness appeared on her face. She asked again, You are the 10,000 sorrowful autumn guest? Fan Xian continued to smile bitterly. I wrote it in a hurry. It doesn't count, it doesn't count. Wanner's eyes gradually brightened. You, it's really you? Fan Xian wanted to go crazy. He wanted to cry but had no tears. Today I came with my sister. If I wasn't Fan Xian, how could my sister help a strange man visit her future sister-in-law? Lin Wanner thought he was right. She covered her mouth and laughed, but then she thought of another problem. So you went to the temple last time to see me? She asked angrily. When she thought about how this young man had kept everything in the dark, Lin Wanner was incomparably angry. It was this hateful fellow who had caused her to worry about her gains and losses these past few days. She had even thought about all those impolite things. She wanted nothing more than to beat this young man up. Fan Xian looked at her expression and knew what she was thinking. He quickly explained, I swear to God, when I first met you in the Temple of Qing, it was a coincidence. I didn't know who you were until I saw you this morning. He looked at Lin Wanner's beautiful face with a smile and said softly, This is all fate. Lin Wanner shyly lowered her head and pulled her wrist from Fan Xian's grasp. Then why did you come with Sister Fan to see me today? She asked in a low voice. Fan Xian was startled. Was he supposed to tell her that after he cured Miss Lin, he was going to elegantly run away from the marriage? He wouldn't dare say that even if he was beaten to death. He could only softly reply, I heard that Miss Lin's health wasn't good and I couldn't see her, so I came to see her in secret. How could I have known that it was the chicken leg girl I met in the Temple of Qing? Lin Wanner lightly spat. Why did he have to call her by her name so badly? Fan Xian smiled and pointed at the chicken leg next to him. Do you want to eat it now? He asked. Lin Wanner couldn't help but cover her mouth and laugh. Go ahead. I'm not that greedy. Fan Xian's ears suddenly twitched. He heard someone get up from downstairs. It seemed they were about to come upstairs. He frowned. Someone's coming. Lin Wanner panicked. Even if he was her future husband, if someone saw him, how could she face others? She pushed him. Then get out of here. Fan Xian had worked hard for half the night. How could he just leave like that? With a smirk on his face, he flipped over and crawled under the covers. The bed was huge and the covers were huge. The room was dark, so if someone were to look from outside, they wouldn't be able to see anything out of the ordinary. Realizing that Fan Xian had crawled under the covers, Lin Wanner turned pale with fright. But before she could do anything, she heard someone coming up. It was the old nanny who had had diarrhea during the day. Lin Wanner was embarrassed and anxious. She slid under the covers and turned her body to the outside, pretending to be asleep. The old nanny looked around and didn't see anything out of the ordinary. She mumbled a few words and felt a little dizzy. It seemed she was sleepy again, so she turned around and went downstairs. Lin Wanner elbowed behind her. She lowered her voice and said shyly, "She's gone. Hurry up and get out." It wasn't easy to get a kiss. Fan Xian, who was thanking the old nanny for the first time, had no reason to leave right away. He said, "I'm sleepy. Lie down a little longer." Lin Wanner now knew that her future husband was a scoundrel. She said angrily, How can I do that?" Fan Xian laughed and moved closer to her body. His nose took in the faint scent of her body. He felt relaxed and happy. Why not? This, if word gets out, how can I face others? Lin Wanner shyly buried her head in the covers. Feeling the heat behind her, she moved forward a little. Fan Xian sighed. He was afraid that the girl would be so scared that she would move out of the bed. That would be a cold. He could only get up. Full of desire, he sat down on the edge of the bed and held the girl's slightly cold hand. Lin Wanner struggled but couldn't break free. She let him be, thinking that as long as he wasn't lying on the bed, it was already a great blessing. Fan Xian looked at her slightly closed eyes and said quietly, "I've realized that my luck in this life has been too good." Chem? Lin Wanner opened her eyes curiously and looked at him with her clear and bright eyes. "I fell in love with a girl. But before I fell in love with her, she was already my fiancée. For something like this to happen, doesn't that mean I'm very lucky?" Fan Xian explained with a smile. His elegant face was full of joy. Lin Wanner asked curiously, If what? Forget it. It's nothing." Lin Wanner bit her lower lip and suppressed the doubts in her heart. "There's something else I need to talk to you about." Fan Xian looked at the faint traces of sweat on her forehead and said with heartache, "What I said during the day was true. Right now you have to take good care of your body. Clear porridge and small dishes are good for your stomach, but for tuberculosis they are of no help." The girl had been pleasantly surprised today, and her crystal heart had long been trembling. When she heard the word tuberculosis, she immediately thought of her own illness, and instead became depressed. Her emotions were agitated, and her face darkened. She said sorrowfully, "The royal doctors have taken a look and said that this illness is not easy to treat. Although it's just tuberculosis, it won't kill people, but if I really am with you in the future, I'm afraid it will tire you out." Fan Xian suddenly looked at her seriously. "Sheep's milk, chicken drumsticks, the medicine I prescribed, and the pills I left for you in a bit. Take them slowly according to the method I told you, and your body will definitely recover." Lin Wanner sighed. The royal doctors can't cure it. They can only drag it out year by year. Fan Xian smiled. "Of course my medical skills are not as good as the royal doctors. Even if my teacher were in the capital, I'm afraid he would only use some unorthodox methods. Your status is noble, and I'm afraid the nobles in the palace wouldn't dare use them. But the diet I mentioned is something the royal doctors can't think of. Plus, as long as you recover, when my teacher returns to the capital, he will certainly be able to get his hands on a lot of precious herbs. When that time comes, there will be hope for your illness. Diagnosis and treatment are one part of it, and medicine is another. Don't be fooled by the countless rare herbs in the palace, but the truly good ones are probably not as good as my teacher's collection." Hearing his earnest words, Lin Wanner was moved. "Thank you for your trouble, Master Fan," she said quietly. Fan Xian was surprised. Why did she have to be so formal? After all, he didn't understand a woman's mind. Once she confirmed that the man in front of her was her future husband, Lin Wanner's words naturally became more reserved. This was a woman's characteristic. He was a little surprised. "You still call me Master Fan?" he asked with a smile. Lin Wanner was curious. "What should I call you?" Suddenly understanding what he meant, she blushed and turned away from him. In a voice as small as a mosquito, she said, "That will have to wait until after we are married, then I'll change it." "What I mean is, you can call me Brother Fan," Fan Xian said, stifling a laugh. Lin Wanner realized that she had been tricked. Embarrassed and angry, she wanted to reach out and hit him, but then she remembered that she had only met this man twice, and that he was still a stranger. She hesitantly stopped. Fan Xian looked at her thin shoulders. "After we are married, let's go to the Tsang Mountains. It's higher up there and there are hot springs. It's the best place for you to recuperate." Hearing the word married, Lin Wanner blushed slightly, but she still nodded. She didn't understand what he meant by higher up. Thinking of something else, she quietly asked, "Is Master Fei really your teacher?" "Yes." Fan Xian smiled. "I always thought that since Master Fei worked for the Overwatch Council, he would be a very low-key person. Who knew that he was so famous in the capital? Lin Wanner laughed. He was a meritorious minister during the northern and western expeditions. Of course he was famous. But people were afraid of his poisons, so they always avoided him. She looked at Fan Xian's beautiful face and asked curiously, "How could Master Fei be your teacher?" Fan Xian shrugged. "Miss Lin, there will probably be a lot of trouble in the future. Right now, I don't even understand it myself. If you marry me in the future, I'm afraid there will be a lot of trouble. You have to think about it carefully." Lin Wanner smiled and shook her head. She knew that after this marriage, there would be a lot of exchanges and redistribution of benefits. At first, she had been very resistant to it and her illness had worsened. But now that she realized that the heavens had eyes, that the young master of the Fan family was the one in front of her, she was already full of gratitude to the heavens. What other extravagant expectations could there be? Thinking of the recent uproar in the capital, she said, "Master Fan, sometimes I really don't understand. You are the son of Count Sinan and a student of Master Fei of the Overwatch Council. How can you be so proficient in poetry?" "That's right, was that line really written by you?" Fan Xian didn't see any doubt on her face. He just asked a simple question. "What's the matter?" he asked curiously. A hint of anger appeared on Lin Wanner's face. "The Empress Dowager liked that line very much, but there have been rumors in the palace that you copied the last 4 lines from a poet of the previous dynasty." She trusted the man in front of her, so she was a little angry. Only then did Fan Xian realize that the aftermath of the poetry conference had not yet settled. The lawsuit with the Guo family had not yet been resolved, and now there was this kind of accusation. But he had copied Du Fu, so he wasn't really angry. Instead, he saw that his fiancée looked tired and he felt sorry for her. So he gently patted her hand and told her to stop talking. "I'll come to see you often. But, what if someone finds out?" "Yes, I'm really worried that if someone finds out, my strange uncle might kill them all." "That's a problem. I'll have to talk to him tomorrow." Fan Xian's hair stood on end, thinking that such a terrible thing could really happen. Lin Wanner looked at his face, refusing to close her eyes. But in the end, she couldn't stop herself from falling asleep. The next morning, Lin Wanner woke up in a daze under the warm blankets. She opened her eyes, rubbed them, and found that they were particularly energetic. The maid smiled sweetly and bowed, then prepared to help her up to wash up and dress. Lin Wanner suddenly remembered what had happened last night, and cried out in surprise. "Where is he?" the maid asked curiously. "Oh." Lin Wanner said anxiously, "Did you hear anything last night?" "No, miss," the maid replied seriously. Lin Wanner walked to the window. Her long black hair hung straight down to her hips, and she was dressed in white. She looked very beautiful. She looked out the window, but there was no trace of that person. She couldn't help but wonder if she had just had a dream last night, a dream that she really wanted to make real. As her imagination ran wild, the maid walked up to her with a half-torn package of oiled paper. She laughed and said, "Miss, you're eating again. Be careful that the nanny sees it and reports it to His Majesty. Hurry up and close the window. Don't let the wind blow." Lin Wanner took the package and found that there were a few pills in her belt. Her heart warmed. She looked out the window and saw that the garden had grown greener. Even after the window was closed, it seemed to be unable to hide the boundless spring that was prying open the window and escaping. Chapter 85. We, the common people, are so happy today. Really King happy. Fan Xian was drinking soy milk and chewing on fried dough sticks in the flower hall, feeling very comfortable. He had to admit that he was lucky. He was already dead, but he had come to this world to live again. He was born pitiful, with his mother dead and his father not wanting him, but later he found out that the people who killed his mother had all been killed. As a son, he wanted to take revenge, but there was no way to do so. Although his father had some problems, at least he didn't show an attitude that he couldn't stand. Another thing was that he had planned to copy books, earn some hard-earned money, and live a good life in this world. But he hadn't thought that there would be a pile of shiny things waiting for him to disdain. Most importantly, if he wanted to make this quick money, he would have to go against his will and accept the arrangements of those big shots, marrying a woman he had never met, and in the end, that woman was the one he liked. There were people who were lucky and there were people who were always lucky, but Fan Xian didn't believe that his luck was as good as his. Seeing that he was in a good mood, Lady Lu didn't react, but Fan Xizha was interested. After his mother left, he asked in a low voice, "Big brother, why are you so happy?" "I've already found a place for the shop. When are you going to take a look?" "Didn't you invite the shopkeeper?" Fan Xian was in a good mood, and his face beamed with happiness. I told you to take care of this yourself, and if there's anything wrong, come find me. If you think you're too young and can't handle it, there are so many people in the manor, you can pick any two of them. Fan Xizha shouted, you're the boss, the books are yours and you've paid for half of it. You have to take a look. Hearing the words boss, Fan Xian said happily, fine, then I'll go in a couple of days. Didn't father beat you a few days ago and forbade you from missing class? Come pick me up and I'll take you around the capital. No, I'll offend people if I go out with you. I don't want to go to court every day. Fan Xian finished the soy milk in his bowl in one gulp and smacked his lips full of dregs. He was somewhat dissatisfied. If this bookstore does well when you grow up, there will be a lot of business waiting for you to do. Fan Xizha didn't understand. He scratched his head and left. Fan Ruoruo listened quietly at the side. She smiled and said, have you decided to accept this marriage? I have no choice but to obey my parents' orders. Fan Xian sighed. In the end, he did not have the talent to be funny. He shook his head and smiled. I must get married. However, the things that come with marriage are a bit troublesome. I have to offend so many people for no reason, and I might not even be able to truly grasp those things. No matter how I think about it, it doesn't seem worth it. Fan Ruoruo knew that her brother was talking about the royal business, and was worried for him. After all, the eldest princess had been in charge for so many years, and no one knew how much the prime minister and the crown prince had profited from it. If this business was to be handed over to Fan Xian in the future, it was necessary for him to take over and check the accounts. Perhaps from the palace treasury to the royal merchant house, many people would be in trouble. She frowned and said, what if I don't check the accounts? It's fine if you don't want to check the accounts, but you have to seal up all the old accounts. If the dirty water from the past splashes onto us, we're done for. And most importantly, if this source of income is cut off, some people will be very angry. Otherwise, I'll just marry Miss Lin and give up the business. After all, this was the result of my father's discussion with His Majesty. If I ask my father to step back now, His Majesty won't be too angry. Fan Xian shook his head. Thinking of his father's expression that night, he knew that his father had a fanatical obsession with taking back his mother's business. Although he didn't know where this obsession came from, it would be very difficult for his father to give up this opportunity in front of him. And he didn't want to give it up. After all, it was left behind by his mother, that woman. It belonged to him. Why should the royal family benefit from it? According to the palace, after he married Lin Wan, it would take a few years before he could personally take care of it. But being closer to the flesh always made his nose feel better. That was why Fan Xian treated the business of the bookstore as a proper business. On one hand, he was familiar with it, and on the other, he wanted to prove to some people that he had a mind for business. Could it be that someone will use some unusual methods? Fan Ruoruo asked worriedly. Fan Xian thought for a moment and replied, although I've never met the eldest princess, nor have I met any of the important people in the palace, I think that since she was able to manage the palace treasury for 10 years, no matter what her personality is, she must be a smart person. In the current situation, if I were to be killed, regardless of whether she did it or not, many people would be watching her. Perhaps the emperor doesn't care whether I live or die, but he certainly won't tolerate someone secretly breaking his decree. As an emperor, the most important thing is his own dignity. It just so happens that I'm entangled in a lawsuit and can't leave the capital. If someone makes a move against me in the capital. He shook his head. That would be too stupid. Fan Ruoruo looked at him with admiration. Brother's analysis makes sense. Don't look at me like that. Fan Xian looked at her helplessly. You trust me more and more, girl. I'm not an immortal, just an ordinary person. There are bound to be many things that we don't expect. Fan Ruoruo was a little worried when she heard this, but Fan Xian was fine. After all, Uncle Yi Luyun was always hidden in the shadows. If someone wanted to touch him, they could only do so if the traveling Yi Luyun suddenly returned to the capital. At noon, surrounded by Teng Zijing and a large group of guards, Fan Xian ran to the Fan family's private school to see Fan Xizha. It would have been fine if he hadn't seen him, but once he did, he almost fainted from anger. In the classroom, the children of the Fan clan were all laughing and playing, completely disregarding the old master in front of them. A few of the bolder ones even dipped their brushes in ink and splashed them in front of them. Not only did they stain the walls, but even the corners of the old master's clothes were stained. The old master's face was ashen with anger, but he didn't know how to be angry. The families of these naughty children were quite influential. Although their parents often urged them to respect their teachers, once they were in the private school, these youths changed. Some of the more despicable ones, relying on the strength of their servants, Not only did they hang around in the private school, but they often committed immoral acts on the streets. Fan Xian poked his head through the door and took a careful look. He saw that Fan Xizha was relatively well behaved, sitting at a desk in the corner writing something. The servant assigned to him by the family was squatting next to him, serving him tea. It seemed that he wasn't paying attention to the teacher, but at least he hadn't done anything out of line. Fan Xian had actually overestimated his younger brother. If Fan Xizha's mind hadn't been tied up by something even more interesting, he feared that he would have been even more impudent than the unworthy children in the room. Fan Xian called Fan Xizha out of the room and asked with a calm face, "This is where you study?" Fan Xizha didn't know why he was unhappy and replied angrily, "Yes, what about it? You should be the leader." Fan Xian had great faith in his leadership skills. Furthermore, in the entire Fan clan, Count Sinan's family was the most powerful, so Fan Xizha should have a special position among the children. Fan Xizha scratched his head. "They listen to what I say. That's good." Fan Xian continued, "Go in and teach those rascals a lesson. Make sure they listen to the teacher." Fan Xizha seemed to be in a daze. "Don't respect the teachers?" Fan Xian's eyebrows furrowed. He thought back to when he was in Danzhou, whether it was the teacher in charge of the school or the teacher Fei Jia, he had always respected them. Hearing the noise in the room getting louder and louder, he shouted angrily, "If you dare be like them, I'll slap you." Fan Xizha didn't know why Fan Xian, who had been so gentle lately, would suddenly provoke him. He glared at him and roared, "What right do you have to slap me?" His manservant and a few servants surrounded him. They were already familiar with young Master Fan, but when they heard that he was going to hit their young master, they were eager to protect him. They glared at Fan Xian fiercely, and the manservant took advantage of his familiarity with Fan Xizha and began to curse. Fan Xian frowned. Ting Zijing and a few guards walked up and mercilessly beat the servants of the house. The servant boy who had cursed was slapped countless times in the face. The people who followed Fan Xian were the direct subordinates of Count Sinan. They did not care about the servants in the manor, who were several ranks below them. Now that they were with Fan Xian, they were able to beat up the son of the current government minister without incident. They walked the streets with the wind in their eyes, and they did not hesitate to attack. The lesson was over. The servants looked at Fan Xian with faces full of fear and pain, and retreated timidly. The manservant's cheeks were red and he couldn't stop crying. Fan Xian looked down at Fan Xizha's frightened face and said softly, "I didn't say I would slap you. But if you do something wrong I will slap you." "As for what? It's simple. You can't beat me in a fight and you don't dare complain to your father. If you do something wrong and challenge me, wouldn't that be asking for a slap?" Seeing that Fan Xian didn't seem to have any intention of hitting him, Fan Xizha let out a sigh of relief. He was still the son of an influential family who didn't care about his servants, and he didn't take Fan Xian's beating of his own men too seriously. Although he felt that he had lost some face, it seemed that following Fan Xian had its benefits. Thinking back to his nature as a businessman, he realized that it was better not to offend Fan Xian. "Go in and tidy up the order inside. I'll wait for you outside. Didn't you say you wanted to go look at the shop?" With that, Fan Xian waved his sleeves and walked out the door of the private school. The people of the Fan clan who were waiting outside couldn't help but click their tongues in wonder when they saw what had happened. They thought that the illegitimate son of Count Sinan was so powerful that he dared to bully the legitimate young master of Count Sinan's household in broad daylight. They looked at him with fear. Fan Xian didn't pay any attention to them. He sat on the bench outside the door and waited. Not long after, several miserable cries could be heard from inside the private school, as well as the loud sound of slaps. Fan Xizha's arrogant voice could be heard. "Behave yourselves. If you dare to be disrespectful to the teacher again, I'll slap you." These words were not much different from what Fan Xian had said. It seemed that young Master Fan was venting all the anger he had suffered at his elder brother's hands on his fellow clansmen. This time there was a ruckus. The Fan clan's groom, servants who had been standing guard outside the private school, heard their master's cries of pain in the classroom. They glared fiercely at Fan Xian and rushed in. Fan Xian was afraid that Fan Xizha would be at a disadvantage. He gave Ting Zijing a look and Ting Zijing and a few guards rushed in with the crowd. After a while, Fan Xizha was dragged out. Fan Xizha was not satisfied with the beating. He waved his fists and scolded, "Don't be afraid, don't be afraid. These people wouldn't dare to offend us." It was just as he said. The servants rushed in, but they only dared to protect their master. They didn't dare to fight back. It seemed that Count Sinan's manor had a special place in the Fan clan. After beating the people, Fan Xian grabbed his brother by the neck and carried him to the carriage, leaving the mess he had created. Ting Zijing frowned. Young master, although the people in the clan are becoming more and more unreasonable, they are still old people in the capital. We still need their help. Offending too many people isn't necessarily a good thing. Fan Xian laughed bitterly. What are you afraid of? He thought to himself that perhaps these clansmen did have power, but he was about to marry the princess, and the emperor would be his brother-in-law. What was there to be afraid of? If he didn't teach these little bastards a lesson, he wouldn't be able to vent his anger. Did it feel good? He asked Fan Xizha. Fan Xizha was a little puzzled. That's right. I often beat people up, but it never felt as good as today. Why is that? The resentment he felt at being taught a lesson by his brother had long since dissipated without a trace during the process of his heroic beating. It's simple. You need to find a reason to beat people up. It's like fighting a war. If you have a perfectly honorable reason, then you can fight without any psychological baggage. Even when we attacked Northern Wei, didn't we first say they violated our borders? Fan Xian continued. It's all the same. We have to be righteous. Righteous. Do you understand? I don't understand, Fan Xizha replied sincerely. Chapter 86. Arriving at the bookstore on Dongchuan Road, Fan Xian and the others took a good look and found the location to be quite good. Transportation was convenient, and it was not too far from the Imperial College. Students from all over the kingdom of Qing who were preparing to take the exams passed through here every day. The most important thing was that this place wasn't too crowded. In this way, it was more convenient for the princesses of the princes' mansions and the young ladies of the official families to send their personal maids to buy books. Fan Xian nodded and walked in with Fan Xizha. They were met by the servants of the manor and bowed. Mr. Cui, sorry to trouble you. Mr. Cui forced a smile. I say, young masters, this bookstore does not make a lot of money a year, and yet it requires so much effort. It is not worth it. Fan Xian knew that these former officials of the Ministry of Revenue did not care about a business that was only worth a few thousand taels of silver. He smiled and explained, if my brother likes it, then let him do as he pleases. He did not expect to keep this a secret from Count Sinan, so he asked the servants of the manor to help. Since his father allowed Mr. Cui to help, it was tantamount to tacitly allowing his two sons to cause trouble outside the manor. They talked in a room in the back hall. Fan Xizha bit the shaft of his writing brush, calculating something. Once an account book was placed in front of him, he would immerse himself in it, forgetting everything else. While they were talking, the shopkeeper from Qingyu Hall also arrived. This shopkeeper looked honest and sincere. His eyes were not bright, but they were clear. Fan Xizha was somewhat satisfied and went to talk to him about the bookstore. Fan Ruoruo had already given Fan Xizha the first 60 chapters of Dream of the Red Chamber. Mr. Cui had sent someone to Wansong Hall to keep an eye on the printing, so there should not be any problems. Fan Xizha kept pushing Fan Xian for the later chapters, preparing to make a big splash in the capital. These days, Fan Xian was not in the mood to copy books, so he kept pushing it off. After deciding on a time for the opening of the bookstore, and confirming that the approval from the 8th Bureau of the Overwatch Council would be in their hands, they found that there was nothing else to do in the back room. When the time came, they would buy some classics from Wansong Hall, and with Story of the Stone as the main focus, it seemed that they were just waiting to collect money. As for the workers, they were all handled by the shopkeeper of Qingyu Hall, so the Fan family did not have to worry. Fan Xian wondered why everyone trusted Qingyu Hall so much. When he finally had the chance to be alone with the shopkeeper, he gently asked, "Shopkeeper, what is your name?" The shopkeeper replied with a smile, "Your surname is Yi." Fan Xian's heart trembled. He repeated, "Yi?" The shopkeeper seemed to have noticed Fan Xian's strange expression, and replied with some confusion, "Yes, there are 17 shopkeepers in Qingyu Hall, and they all have the surname Yi. Everyone in the capital knows this. Master Fan? All of you have the surname Yi?" Fan Xian frowned and asked, "How are you related to the Yi family from 20 years ago?" The shopkeeper was a bit surprised. He looked at Fan Xian, and a sense of vicissitudes came over him. "After so many years, I thought the young people of today had long since forgotten about the Yi family. That's right, we were all shopkeepers of the Yi family back then. Later on, the Yi family ran into some problems, and all of their businesses were lost to the palace. We were supposed to leave and find our own way out, but for some reason the court didn't allow us to run our own businesses. That's why we're in such an awkward situation now. We can only manage the businesses for others, but we can't buy our own shares. This is how Qingyu Hall came to be." Fan Xian looked at the shopkeeper again. He knew that the shopkeeper had been his mother's subordinate, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of familiarity. He asked curiously, after the Yi family was in trouble, did the court not? He didn't finish his sentence, but the shopkeeper understood what he meant. They said to cut weeds and eliminate roots. Since the court had taken over the Yi family's property, they had no intention of keeping these old people alive. The shopkeeper didn't know why, but he also felt that the young master of Fan Manor in front of him was very familiar. He thought for a moment and replied, "We also felt that it was strange. So these years we have lived in fear. The court did not allow us to leave the capital, so we were afraid of what would happen one day. Take me to Qingyu Hall one day." Fan Xian suddenly found a place in the capital that was related to his mother's past, and he couldn't help but be surprised. He grabbed the shopkeeper's shoulder and said, "I have many things to ask you." After returning to Fan Manor, Fan Xian sat in his father's study and told him what had happened that day. He asked curiously, "Qingyu Hall, are they really the old people of the Yi family?" "Of course they are." Fan Jian stroked his short beard as if reminiscing about the past. He said slowly, "These people are actually not simple. Back in the day they were all shopkeepers of the Yi family in various provinces. However, your mother offended the nobles and met with misfortune. You know how glorious the Yi family was back then. For a time the court panicked. If the Yi family fell, I'm afraid the Qin kingdom would be in chaos for many decades. So in the end they came up with a compromise. First they took the Yi family back to the royal family. At least in name they cut off the possibility of the officials taking advantage of the situation to extort them, and then Fan Xian cut him off. How did the people who killed my mother die in the end? This was a question he had always wondered about. Fan Jian looked him in the eye and said coldly, "You are young. You probably don't remember what happened in the Qin kingdom 14 years ago." "I remember." Fan Xian frowned. 14 years ago, it seemed that someone wanted to change the world, to pull His Majesty down from the throne. So in the end a lot of things happened. There was a month of killing in the capital and most of the original nobles were killed. Blood flowed, and the heads of the nobles were placed on the city walls for a mile. That was the so-called month of blood in the capital. Although I have never experienced it, I have heard Teacher Fei talk about it many times. "Correct," Fan Jian said in a cold voice. "During this purge, all those who participated in the plot against the Yi family were killed by us." Fan Xian noticed the word "we" in his father's words. "Were we?" he asked carefully. "Me and Shin Pingping, of course." Fan Jian smiled. "This was probably the most successful operation we have ever carried out in the 20 years we have followed His Majesty. The Fan family also used this incident to rise to power, and the Overwatch Council, because of the terrifying role they played in this incident, firmly established their influence among the officials." Fan Xian sighed. "So the cause of this incident was Father and Sir Qin seeking revenge for my mother. What happened next?" Fan Xian asked about the Yi family. "As I said before, the Yi family's businesses were taken into the palace treasury. This was the best way to stabilize the court at the time. The court was full of civil and military officials, and they could not come up with a more effective suggestion." Fan Jian explained, "The problem was with those shopkeepers. They were all taught by your mother. Although they were far from being as wise as your mother was, if they were left alone, who knows if a second Yi family would appear. So His Majesty decided to gather them all in the capital. He had them train some people to take over those businesses, but he did not allow them to own real businesses. That is how the capital's famous Qingyu Hall came to be." "If you want to do business, they are a good choice," Fan Xian said sadly. "Because of this reason, these shopkeepers were forced to stay in the capital for more than 10 years. How tragic." "Father, if we use these shopkeepers, won't it attract the attention of the court?" Fan Jian shook his head. "Using the shopkeepers of Qingyu Hall has always been the favorite method for the private businesses of the various princes. The court doesn't care about this, but if you want to gather all 17 shopkeepers of Qingyu Hall, it doesn't seem necessary. If the court is really afraid of this, why did they not kill all of them in the beginning?" Fan Xian asked his own question. Fan Jian looked at his son and smiled. "When something happened to your mother, I was fighting with His Majesty in the west. Qin Pingping went to the border between our country and northern Qi to carry out a secret mission. Halfway through, he came to his senses and returned to the capital. That is why this happened. If we have already returned to the capital and these people are still killed, then you underestimate your father's power." Lu Shi knocked on the door and the father and son stopped talking. Fan Jian let her in. Seeing the bowl of fruit juice in Lu Shi's hands, Fan Xian knew that it was late, and that it was time for his father to go to bed. He stood up and prepared to leave. But Count Sinan waved his hand for him to stay, and Lu Shi went to rest. Before Lu Shi left, Fan Xian caught a glimpse of worry in her eyes, and knew that she was worried about her husband's health. He couldn't help but frown, thinking that this woman really did have some affection for his father. It was a pity that she was too cruel to do such a thing all those years ago. He knew that if his father did not want him to leave, he must have something important to tell him, so he listened attentively. "Tell me about the recent situation in the court." Count Sinan picked up the warm fruit juice and slowly drank it. "I know you still resent the fact that Lu Shi sent people to poison you 4 years ago." Fan Xian was startled. He did not understand what the situation in the court had to do with Lu Shi, nor did he expect his father to so bluntly bring this matter up. For a moment he did not know what to say. The two matters are actually related. Fan Jian knew what his son was thinking. 4 years ago Lu Shi made her move because Xija was getting on in years, but he was becoming less and less serious. I had not been able to bring her up, and she could not help but feel a little hopeless. In a moment of blindness she made that decision. But more importantly, it was because she had entered the palace once and received a guarantee from someone that once you died, Fan Xija would inherit everything of the Fan family. Entered the palace? Whose guarantee could make her disregard her grandmother's life? Fan Xian asked coldly. Chapter 87. Fan Jian frowned and put down the bowl of fruit juice in his hand, as if the warm bowl was a little hot. "I'm not trying to exonerate Lady Lu. It's just that the people she found seemed to be obeying her orders, but in reality, they were obeying the orders of the people in the palace. Lady Lu was just a scapegoat in this matter." Fan Xian frowned. "Who in the palace wanted me dead? Why did they want me dead? Did they already know I was the son of the Yi family?" Of course they didn't know. Fan Jian didn't know why he was so agitated. His right hand tightly gripped the armrest of his chair. "No one who knew about this would want to hurt you. If someone wanted to hurt you, it wouldn't be for this reason. Could it be that no one in the capital knew about the relationship between my father and my mother? If those people knew about the relationship between my father and the Yi family, why didn't anyone suspect that I, an illegitimate child, was the son of the Yi family?" Fan Xian pondered this question, full of suspicion. He felt a chill in his heart as he realized that there were more important questions to be asked. But he didn't dare to ask them. Instead he quietly said, "Then why? 4 years ago, I was only a 12-year-old boy far away in Danzhou. I didn't seem to have anything to do with anything in the capital. 4 years ago, that was when His Majesty adopted Miss Lin as his daughter. That was also when he appointed the princess's marriage. At that time, His Majesty decided that you would be in charge of the future royal business. It was also at that time that you appeared in the conversation of the people in the palace for the first time. Seeing a 12-year-old child owning a gold ingot that he couldn't even lift, what do you think the nobles in the palace would choose? They would choose to kill me cleanly. The Overwatch Council investigated for 4 years, and basically got to the bottom of this matter. Unfortunately, there was no evidence, so they couldn't do anything to those people." Fan Xian laughed. "Even if there was evidence, I'm afraid they wouldn't be able to do anything to them. After all, the Overwatch Council is a subject, and those people are the masters." Fan Jian nodded. "Who wanted to kill me?" "The Empress, the eldest princess." Fan Jian smiled. "But since you have safely grown up and entered the capital, I believe that no matter how much courage they have, they will not risk the wrath of His Majesty and make a move against you." Fan Xian sorrowfully said, "You are too optimistic. Even if he killed me, would the Emperor do anything to his wife and sister?" Fan Jian didn't answer. Instead he said, "In the near future, Crown Prince Jing will definitely think of a way to get closer to you. He will also think of a way to let you meet the second prince. You have to handle this carefully." Fan Xian agreed. He knew that every major family in the capital had to take a stand on this matter, whether actively or passively. The princes fought for the right to inherit the world. Although it seemed like an old-fashioned trick, whether it was in that world or this one, it would always be an unchanging play. As long as the thick curtain was pulled back, the actors hidden behind it would all come onto the stage. Whether it was a 3-foot sword or a 3-inch tongue, they would act for others to see and for themselves to see. If Fan Manor wanted to be impartial and follow the Emperor closely, it seemed that they would have to put in a lot of effort. Late at night, Fan Jian sat alone in his armchair. As he drank the fruit juice that had already cooled, he thought about what Fan Xian had just said. He thought about the painful price he had paid and his lips twitched. He thought about the horrible and bloody scene of that bloody month in the capital. On that gloomy, unknown night, the emperor's father trembled under his knife. When Fan Jian personally cut off his father's head, the skull rolled on the ground. As if remembering that voice, a gentle smile appeared on Fan Jian's lips. In the days that followed, Fan Xian lived a carefree life. Every day he enjoyed the treatment of a young master in the manor. Occasionally he would slip out to Dongchuan Road to see how the planned bookstore was progressing. He gradually became familiar with the shopkeeper, whose surname was also Yi. Everything went smoothly, so Mr. Cui returned to Count Sinan's side. And every other night, Fan Xian would slip out to the royal courtyard, climbing over the wall with familiarity. But now the window was no longer closed and the drumstick girl was always waiting for him. The reason why he often went there was not because he was in love with her, but because Lin Wan'er's illness could not be delayed any longer. The people of the royal family were all blockheads. Fortunately, after receiving bribes from Count Sinan's manor, who knew how many twists and turns, the imperial physician finally agreed that a little oil was good for the princess' health. Fan Xian often went there to deliver food as well as his own pills. Because he was afraid that it would conflict with the medicine prescribed by the imperial physician, the medicine was very gentle. Apart from that, he also brought along a lot of delicious food to satisfy his fiancée's little mouth, which was gluttonous with each passing day. After a few days like this, Wan'er's body clearly showed signs of improvement. Her face gradually became rosier, but it wasn't the unhealthy bright red that she used to have. Furthermore, the flesh on her body had also increased, and her cheeks were clearly rounder. Lin Wan'er felt a bit of a headache, but Fan Xian was incomparably happy. After they were married, wouldn't he be able to play with his favorite baby girl every day? The guards in the courtyard were a bit lax, and Fan Xian had been trained by Wu Zhu to climb walls in Danzhou. So no one discovered that he was secretly feeding her medicine every night. But Lin Wan'er's illness could not be cured completely. Fan Xian thought that it would be better to wait for Fei Ti to return. If it didn't work, then after they were married, he would find a way to move out of the capital. The Fan family still had a courtyard in the Tsang Mountains, which was most suitable for recuperation. After these nights of contact, this pair of fiancés had become much more familiar with each other. For some reason, after falling in love at first sight in the Temple of Qin, the two of them felt that the other was very similar to them. Perhaps it was their appearance, or perhaps it was their temperament, or perhaps it was their way of looking at things. This feeling of kinship made Fan Xian and Wan'er, the first love of their first love, truly feel the beauty of holding hands. They had gone from being strangers to knowing each other's thoughts with a glance and a finger. It did not take long for them to go from being strangers to knowing each other's thoughts. Lin Wan'er looked at his face and suddenly looked worried. You use that incense to make Siki sleep every day. After a while there won't be any problems, right? Fan Xian comforted her. I told you the first time I came, this incense can only be good for the body. Lin Wan'er thought of the first day he had snuck in through the window and couldn't help but giggle. If I really thought you were a rapist and killed you, what would you do? Fan Xian smiled bitterly and took her hand. I-Chin, perhaps there are some things I must let you know. Hearing him call her by her nickname, Lin Wan'er blushed slightly. What is it? If you wanted to kill me, it would probably be very difficult. Fan Xian laughed. I've been learning from very powerful people since I was a child, so I'm not a scholar who writes poetry. I'm more like a boorish man. Lin Wan'er sighed. I know. If you weren't a boorish man, why would you beat up Minister Gui's son in the middle of the street and make such a fuss? Even now you still can't leave the capital. Speaking of which, the case of Fan Xian beating up Guo Baoquan had never been closed. The two sides were at loggerheads, and the capital government had long since put up a white flag and raised a no-contest sign. They had sent the case to the Ministry of Justice, saying that the case was complicated and difficult to solve. In reality, the case was not complicated at all. If they really wanted to investigate it, all they had to do was arrest the guards who were following Fan Xian around the streets of the capital, and then torture them. Everything would be clear. The problem was that the two families involved in the case were not simple, so the case was naturally complicated. This was a crooked way, but it was also the right way of officialdom. After the case was sent to the Ministry of Justice, it was their turn to have a headache. Currently, they were planning to ask the palace to issue an edict to let the Overwatch Council handle the case. Although this kind of public security case was not within the scope of the Overwatch Council's jurisdiction, both sides were officials, and the Overwatch Council had the responsibility of supervising officials, so it made sense. All of the officials in the capital knew that the director of the Overwatch Council was not a relative of any official. So the Guo family was waiting for the day the Overwatch Council began their investigation. What they didn't know was that Fan Xian was also waiting for that day. He held the token that Fei Jie had left for him, so he was not afraid of the Overwatch Council. In the quiet night, Fan Xian was a little lost in thought. He comforted Lin Wan. It's not a big deal. It'll be over in a few days. He suddenly remembered that the mother of this girl in front of him had tried to kill him 4 years ago, and he couldn't help but frown. Lin Wan was an exceptionally intelligent girl. Seeing his expression, she asked, "Has there been some trouble lately?" Fan Xian looked at the girl's picturesque eyebrows and sighed. "In the future, if there is any problem between me and the eldest princess, I am very worried about what you will do. I'm afraid you will be very sad." Lin Wan smiled. "Why do I have to think about things that haven't happened yet? Wan has been sick since she was a child. It seems that she has always been counting the days, never knowing when she will leave this world. So I don't like to think about things that haven't happened yet." Fan Xian sighed. Full of pity, he pulled her into his arms. Smelling the lingering fragrance in her hair, he kept saying in his heart, "I know how you feel because I once had the same experience as you." Kissing a gentleman's lips, lingering fragrance on his teeth. "Wan, your body is very soft. You are touching the pillow that you brought a few days ago." Fan Xian liked the feeling of sneaking into a woman's boudoir at night. It was like a clandestine affair, but it was a kind of clandestine affair without any psychological burden. If he could, he would like to live like this for a little longer. At least until he was married, there wouldn't be too many things to disturb him. To be able to live such a happy life in the capital was something that he could not have imagined before he left Danzhou. But as the saying goes, things don't always go according to one's wishes. A peaceful life would come to an end one day. That afternoon, Crown Prince Jing's carriage arrived at Fan Manor. Lady Lu hurried forward to greet him respectfully, inviting him into the reception hall for tea. Chapter 88. Crown Prince Li Hongqing waited for a while and found that the person he was waiting for had not yet arrived. He couldn't help but laugh at himself, thinking that Master Fan was quite arrogant. Of all the civil and military officials in the court, there were few who had the right to make him wait. Then he thought of the events in the capital and secretly admired Fan Xian, who had not been in the capital for long, for all the ruckus he had caused. Throwing out a few poems had shaken the literary world. Beating someone up in the middle of the night had shaken the bureaucracy. As for his marriage to the Prime Minister's illegitimate daughter, it had shaken those who had the right to know. As he thought this, Fan Xian had already shouted from afar. As he bowed, he quickly walked over. He had not deliberately made the Crown Prince wait, but he had been in the middle of discussing some matters regarding the bookstore with the shopkeeper of Qingyu Hall, so he had been delayed. The two young men sat across from each other, took a few sips of tea and then began to talk business. The first to speak was, of course, Fan Xian. He had to express his gratitude for what had happened that night. Hearing his thanks, Crown Prince Li Hongqing laughed and said warmly, "At the time I thought, we've only known each other for a few days, how could you be willing to reserve the entire Drunken Immortal Tavern to entertain me? So that's what you were thinking. But it doesn't matter. Guo Baoquan is an idiot, and among the Crown Prince's retainers he doesn't rank very high. It's just that the old man at home has some knowledge. If you beat him up, then beat him up." Fan Xian knew that the Crown Prince was referring to his actions in court. He laughed at himself. "Isn't that because I have no experience? If I had known that it was so easy to beat people up in the capital, I would have punched him in the manor garden." Li Hongqing was startled and hurriedly waved the gold fan in his hand. "That won't do. If you go too far, I won't be able to protect you." Fan Xian chuckled and thanked him again. Then he asked what the Crown Prince had come for. Li Hongqing thought for a moment, then said, "I can't hide this from you. Because of the relationship between our families, I have to make things clear. Originally, the second Imperial Prince wanted me to trick you into meeting him, so that we could meet naturally so that you wouldn't be disgusted. But this method is still deceiving you, so I will say it clearly. Tomorrow the second Imperial Prince will hold a banquet on Lujing River, and he has specially invited you. I will only be accompanying you." Fan Xian frowned. "I really don't understand. The second prince's status is so noble. I'm just a mere scholar. How could I possibly be worthy of his attention? Do you really not understand, or are you pretending to not understand?" Li Hongqing pointed at his nose and laughed. "Acting like you is really a failure." Fan Xian smiled awkwardly but did not reply. Li Hongqing noticed that there were no other people around the flower hall. He said seriously, "It's still the same thing. When I first saw you I felt happy. I couldn't bear to hide it from you. I felt that this kind of method would inevitably alienate us. You know, even though the emperor is still in his prime, there are always worries nearby. So, the eyes of the people in court are always on the princes. The first prince was born with great martial prowess, but he led troops outside. Even though the crown prince is the emperor's son, his conduct has always been dishonorable. Although King Jing's manner is impartial, to tell you the truth, among the princes, my relationship with the second imperial prince is the best. Fan Xian was startled. Why was this situation so different from what he had expected? In his previous life, when he watched Yueha, the princes would always make simple things complicated. They would want to wear 80 pieces of clothing so that they wouldn't fall into the trap of gossip. Who would be like this person in front of him? From the very beginning he made things clear. This was a fight for the throne and he would lose his head. How could he run around naked and shout wildly? Seeming to realize that his words had frightened Fan Xian, Li Hongqing laughed awkwardly. Do you think I was too straightforward? To tell you the truth, I don't know why, but when I look at you, I don't want to play those empty games. You're right. I'm trying to win you over on behalf of the second imperial prince. This is like marriage. It's a business that both parties are willing to do. Fan Xian was startled. He looked at the crown prince's clear eyes, as if he wanted to see something hidden within. He couldn't tell if the crown prince was a gentleman with a heart as clear as the moon, or if he was a strategist who used honesty as a way to win people over. But no matter what, the crown prince had already chosen the right side. Running around naked was one thing, but Fan Xian had no power in the capital and no manpower. He would never dare to take off his clothes and hug the crown prince's arm. He smiled. May I know clearly why the second imperial prince wants to see me? It's because of the marriage in October. Li Hongqing was still very frank. He smiled and looked at him. After next year's competition, if you show the appropriate ability, the emperor will give you the right to manage those industries. For us, this is a great thing. First of all, there will be a lot less money coming into the accounts and some things will be inconvenient. On the other hand, I believe that Count Sinan has been in charge of the Ministry of Revenue for many years. He must understand that when the new takes over from the old, there must be a need to check the old accounts. Perhaps there will be some pleasant surprises. Fan Xian was silent. His eyebrows drooped down, but he didn't seem very dispirited. On the contrary, he gave off a feeling of being docile and harmless. It's still early, he said quietly. The marriage is in October. I'll have to wait until next year or the year after before I can really come into contact with those things. Yes, so tomorrow it's just a meal. Li Hongqing looked at him seriously. How about it as a return gift for what happened last time? You know that I'm saying this today because I trust you. Perhaps when you see the second imperial prince tomorrow, you'll have some new ideas. Fan Xian smiled. He thought that the struggle between the second imperial prince and the crown prince wouldn't truly begin for another decade or so. Now even an inconspicuous person like him was involved. It really did feel like rebellion starts with a child. He agreed and sent the crown prince out of the manor. Returning to his father's study, he sat in a chair by the desk and stared at the pens in the brush holder. His brows were furrowed as he pondered. When he had beaten up Guobaoquan, he had chosen Crown Prince Jing as a cover to give the Crown Prince a chance to win him over. Because in order to survive in the capital, he had to choose the right side. His father could always stand by the emperor's side, but he had also said that future matters were matters for the younger generation. If Fan Xian wanted to choose a side, it wouldn't necessarily be with the second imperial prince, but it would definitely be against the Crown Prince. The reason was simple. 4 years ago the empress had wanted him dead. 4 years later the people in the palace would still want him dead. And in the capital, which was as deep as the sea, it seemed that he was just an ant that could be pinched to death at any moment. Could an ant like him climb a tree? The second imperial prince's banquet location was still on Lujing River. Hearing this, Fan Xian smiled bitterly. Recently he had spent every night with one. Although there was the occasional sweet and delicious taste, skin contact was too little. After all, she was his official fiancée, so when she was shy, he couldn't be too presumptuous. When he thought of the soft, jade-like body under his hands that night, Fan Xian immediately thought of her name, Sea Lily. His heart couldn't help but ripple. He secretly thought back to his previous life in the Middle Ages in Europe, who used intestines as condoms, and how they did it. Then he thought of why this woman had so coincidentally left the capital on the day of the lawsuit. The security in the capital had always been good, except for the recent addition of the Fan family's underground boxing. So Fan Manor's carriage only brought 4 guards with it, and under the spring light, it slowly made its way west of the city. After passing Wangchun Gate, they passed by Nyolan Street, where he had once ambushed and beaten people. Fan Xian lifted the curtain and laughed. Ting Zijing and the other 3 guards had experienced what had happened that day. Hearing their young master laugh, they naturally knew what he was laughing about. Feeling refreshed, they also laughed. There weren't many residences around Nyolan Street, but there were a few shops that had fallen into disrepair many years ago, which was why it was called the Broken Door Shop. It was very quiet here, no matter whether it was day or night, and there were no pedestrians. It was truly the best place to ambush someone on the street. Fan Xian stuck his head out of the curtain and watched the large leaves of the parasol tree slowly recede above his head. He looked up at the sky and thought about how he should behave when he saw the second imperial prince later. The second imperial prince should be well aware of his father's strength, and presumably wouldn't make any excessive demands. He probably just wanted to make some friendly contact, and pave the way for something that might happen a decade later. As they walked, Fan Xian suddenly frowned. He didn't know why, but he felt that something was wrong, as if there was something strange about his surroundings. He looked around the carriage and found that it was quiet. There was nothing out of the ordinary. Suddenly, his nose twitched and he smelled an extremely faint sweetness. It was the smell of quinine, an arrow poison extracted from the favorite frog of the Western barbarians. "Spread out!" Fan Xian shouted, and his body was already the first to jump out of the carriage window. He grabbed the guard closest to him with one hand, but he didn't see who it was. Although his childhood training had made his sense of smell unusually sensitive, he could still smell this strange fragrance, which meant that the archer was already very close to his carriage. The assassination was about to begin without warning. Just as he jumped out of the carriage, a large stone was thrown from behind the alley. It whistled through the air and smashed into the carriage, shattering it into countless splinters that flew into the air. Chapter 89. With a loud bang, no one knew who had such godly strength to actually be able to throw such a large stone over the high wall. The carriage was smashed to pieces by the huge stone, and then a rain of arrows came, fiercely stabbing into the carriage. If Fan Xian had not seen the opportunity and escaped quickly, even if he had been hiding in the carriage and could rely on his nimble movements to keep his life under the stone, he would have been immediately shot to death. The Fan family guards, with the exception of Ting Zijing, were all 5th-level masters. Faced with the sudden attack, they did not panic. With a few clangs, they pulled out their swords and brandished them. A few flashes of silver light blocked most of the arrows. But although there were not many archers, they were too close and the arrows were too fast. The guards could not cover them, and after a few muffled grunts, the 3 guards were hit in the legs and they staggered to their knees. The rain of arrows took its first break. The 3 guards gritted their teeth and jumped onto the top of the wall. With a sweep of their swords, they cut down the archers behind the wall. But the poison was too strong, and in a moment the 3 guards felt their bodies go numb. They could no longer control their bodies and they half knelt on the ground. At that moment, they raised their heads to see a pair of terrifying giant palms slapping down on their heads. Fan Xian hid behind a wutong tree and avoided the first arrows, but he had no way of immediately rushing to help his subordinates. He heard 3 familiar cries from behind the high wall. His heart was filled with rage, and in his grief, he was almost pierced by the 2 swords around him that looked like vipers. 2 women had trapped him. They were dressed in black, and the swords in their hands were also painted black to avoid reflecting light. They were obviously experienced assassins. Fan Xian knew that since they had not come out with their faces covered, they must have wanted to kill all 5 of them. He turned around and twisted his toes on the ground, bending his knees slightly. The sword on the left brushed past his left chest, and then he narrowly avoided the sword on the right. Fan Xian had never learned any martial arts. He had only received 10 years of instruction from Wuxia, so his dodging was completely subconscious. Fortunately, although these 2 black swords were as nimble as snakes and as elusive as smoke, they were far inferior to Wuxia's wooden stick in terms of speed and accuracy. That was why Fan Xian was able to evade the maggot-infested stabs time and time again in such a perilous situation. The 3 of them fought further and further along the wall. Fan Xian finally awoke from his panic. Looking at the 2 swords again, it seemed that the tips of the swords had become much slower. As for the 2 deathly pale female assassins, they discovered that although their opponent was in a sorry state, the black swords in their hands were unable to pierce his body at all. With another bang, the wall at the far corner of the alley collapsed. A man as tall as a giant miracle god walked out from the broken wall. He walked straight to a guard who had fallen under a wutong tree with an arrow in his left leg. Of the 4 guards who had followed Fan Xian out today, 3 had already died. This was the last one who had fallen under the tree with a sore and numb body. When Fan Xian had gone to grab him, he had not noticed him. Only now, through the light of the swords, did he realize that it was Ting Zijing. Fan Xian's heart tightened. With a muffled grunt, he wanted to charge in that direction, but he did not expect that the vicious swords in the hands of the two women would not relax and would trap him all around. At that moment, Ting Zijing, who had looked like he was on the verge of death, suddenly leaped up from the ground. The knife at his waist, which had been hidden behind his back, turned into a strange light and slashed at the big man's neck. Fan Xian was overjoyed, but then he was extremely shocked. He saw the big man tilt his head slightly and raise his right hand. As if he were pinching a fly, he caught the knife that Ting Zijing had risked his life to slash out. A trace of blood flowed from the big man's hand, but his hand was not cut off. Fan Xian really did not know what his body was made of. Ting Zijing saw that the situation was not good. With a muffled grunt, he pushed off the big man's chest with the tip of his foot and prepared to jump over the wall. Although Ting Zijing was the leader of Fan Xian's guards, he was the weakest in terms of martial cultivation. However, he was the most clear-headed of them all. The big man grinned and punched out. At that moment, Ting Zijing felt the arrow poison in his body acting up. His body went limp and he did not dodge. With a crack, Ting Zijing let out a wretched howl. His left thigh had been broken by the punch and he fell to the ground, fresh blood rapidly seeping out of his trousers. When the big man gripped Ting Zijing's knife, Fan Xian already knew something was wrong. With a muffled grunt, his footsteps abruptly paused, allowing the two black swords to brush past his chest and abdomen. The edges of the swords pierced through his clothes and drew two intersecting bloody wounds on his body. Fan Xian finally took advantage of this moment to pinch his hands together. Two wisps of pink smoke flashed out, directly toward the faces of the two female assassins. The female assassins reacted with lightning speed. Holding their breath, they closed their mouths and prepared to flee. Fan Xian had gone to great lengths to find such an opportunity. How could he let it go? With a loud roar, tyrannical Jinqi surged out of his body. With a shake of his arms, they seemed to suddenly grow longer, and his palms were about to touch the throats of the two female assassins. With two soft cracking sounds, the female assassins' throats were crushed. Blood frothed from their mouths and they fell limply to the ground. At that moment, the big man had already raised his hand and was about to slap Ting Zijing's head. Fan Xian was very calm. This calmness came from the experience of 2 lives, and also from the teachings of Fei Jie and Wu Zhu. He had no time to think about why Wu Zhu had not acted, but he knew that this was the most dangerous test he had faced since coming to the capital. If he could not even pass this test, it would only prove that he should not have been born into this world to live again. It only took the blink of an eye for him to cross the distance of 40 feet. With a flip of his left hand, he had already fed a pill to Ting Zijing. He raised his right palm and blocked the big man's palm in midair. A muffled sound exploded in the alley. The sycamore tree next to it began to tremble, and its leaves fell powerlessly to the ground. Fan Xian felt a bone-deep pain in his right hand. A powerful force, which he had never encountered before, was transmitted from the big man's palm. In just a moment he could not hold on any longer. He grunted and a trickle of blood seeped from the corner of his mouth. But he did not panic. His left hand had already reached for the trigger, and he was ready to give his opponent a fatal blow. But at that moment something very strange happened. A gust of wind blew in from the mouth of the alley, gently swirling around Fan Xian's body. It seemed that a strange force, using the wind as a medium, was constantly competing with his body. Although this force was not strong, it was very annoying, and it forcefully interfered with Fan Xian's following actions. The big man grinned and chuckled. The way he looked at Fan Xian was like that of a brute beast, and his eyes were suffused with a terrifying red. Fan Xian's gaze passed through the big man's broad back, and he saw a blurry figure at the mouth of the alley wearing a bamboo hat. "Let me smash your head in." The big man seemed to have realized that Fan Xian had no other choice. He laughed wildly and the strength in his palm increased. Fan Xian snorted coldly. He knew that he was facing the greatest predicament since his rebirth. His right arm began to tremble slightly, but deep inside he kept shouting, "Smash your head." In this moment of life and death, the Jinqi that had been circulating throughout his body, which seemed to have long been as calm as a lake, seemed to have encountered some sort of provocation and could no longer calm down. A vast wave of Jinqi gushed out from the snow-capped mountain at his back, and along the small circulation in his body, it suddenly poured into his right arm. In that instant, Fan Xian had the illusion that his right arm was made of iron. The powerful collision of Jinshi caused the two palms, which were quite different in size, to separate by about an inch. Then they fiercely collided again. There was a loud bang followed by countless sharp whistles. Countless thin streams of Jinshi appeared around the two men, and they tore the wutong leaves floating in the air to pieces. Die! Fan Xian roared. With terrifying control, he pulled back his fist and punched out in a straight line, striking the big man's abdomen. A strange expression appeared on the big man's face. He opened his mouth and Fan Xian's face was covered in blood. His abdomen had clearly caved in. But no one could have imagined that this big man's life force would be so tenacious. After receiving such a heavy blow, he still stood firm and did not move. Instead, his large hand like a fan fiercely slapped Fan Xian's right shoulder. Fan Xian's right shoulder immediately became like tofu that had been wiped by a black blind man. It was a mess and blood flowed freely. But Fan Xian's ruthlessness finally exploded today. After receiving such a heavy blow, he only cried out in pain. His whole body borrowed the force of the blow to throw himself into the big man's arms. His left hand had already pulled out a slender dagger, and he viciously stabbed it into the big man's throat. Then he forcefully pulled it down. First, a large hole was smashed into the big man's abdomen, and immediately after, his chest was split open. Messy internal organs rushed out, and fresh blood and abdominal fluids wrapped around the muscles and intestines flowed onto his feet. He didn't dare believe his eyes. He raised his head to glance at Fan Xian, and then he fell backward. Like a large tree, he smashed into the ground with a buzzing sound. The entire world was silent. Fan Xian panted, maintaining a standing posture with great difficulty. He looked at the blurry figure wearing a bamboo hat at the mouth of the alley. Chapter 90. A cool breeze blew but the blood did not disperse. Fan Xian looked at the man in the bamboo hat in the corner of the alley. He vaguely guessed that he was a magician regarded as useless by the martial arts masters, but he did not expect that he would almost die at the hands of the big man because of him. The figure politely bowed to Fan Xian and prepared to leave. The distance between the two of them was a good 40 feet, and this sorcerer was skilled in wind magic. He was confident that if he ran, no one in the world could catch him unless the 4 grandmasters came personally, let alone Fan Xian, who was heavily injured. His plan had failed, so he naturally had to turn around and leave. Fan Xian looked at the man who was still concerned about his manners. He threw down the slender dagger, raised his left arm and gently pulled at the spring. At the entrance of the alley, the figure fell to the ground, clutching his throat. With a pained howl, he died immediately. A fine crossbow bolt was stuck between the fingers of the corpse. Idiot! Fan Xian fed Teng Zijing a pill, and the poison from the arrow was somewhat cleared. He had already woken up, but the remaining poison had not been dispelled. He would certainly have to return to the manor to treat it. Fan Xian's beautiful face was now very pale. Stained with the blood of the big man, he looked particularly frightening. He looked at the awakened Teng Zijing and said, "Pinch this place." He pointed to a place at the base of Teng Zijing's thigh, which was the main artery. Teng Zijing's thigh was already broken, and his face was pale from the pain. Sweat poured down like soybeans, and he trembled as he pressed down on the base of his thigh, touching the wound. He could not help but cry out again. But Teng Zijing was a real man. He watched as Fan Xian tore the cloth to stop the bleeding, and poured some of the burning powder on the wound. He did not make another sound. The most important part of this kind of injury was the quarter of an hour after the injury. In Fan Xian's previous life, there was a saying, the platinum quarter of an hour. Fan Xian nervously finished the treatment and confirmed that Teng Zijing would not die. Only then did he let out a sigh of relief and almost fall to the ground. With great difficulty Teng Zijing said, "Young master, your injury." Only now did Fan Xian think of his wound. He realized that his right shoulder was in extreme pain. He grunted in pain and sent his Jinshi to that area. He found that there was nothing wrong with his meridians. There shouldn't be any terrible consequences. He said, "Lie still and wait for a moment." He still had a sliver of hope in his heart as he walked along the broken wall that the terrifying man had opened up. He saw corpses behind the wall, and most of them were the archers that had been killed by the 3 brave guards. Then he saw the 3 corpses that were curled up into a ball and had their skulls smashed. Curling up into a ball was a symptom of being poisoned. His head must have been smashed by that terrifying man. After confirming the death of the 3 guards, Fan Xian silently retreated and sat beside Teng Zijing. Silently, he once again bandaged his wounds and silently waited for the arrival of some friend or enemy. Fan Xian's attack on Yolan Street was, without a doubt, the most shocking news in the capital this month. The kingdom of Qing had been peaceful for a long time, and the capital, the most benevolent of places, was even more tightly guarded. Even ordinary murder cases were rare, much less the eldest son of the Minister of Revenue, Fan Jian, in broad daylight on the street. Although this young master had not yet been recorded in the family tree, this matter was different from the previous brawl. The assassin was clearly here to kill, and they had used an archer. For someone to be able to use an archer to kill someone in an important place like Jingdo, this had already touched the bottom line of the court's rule. So the enormous organization of the kingdom of Qing began to move, and it did not take long to find out the truth of the assassination. This was also thanks to Fan Xian. If he had not fought back during the assassination and left the bodies of the enemy's main force on Yolan Street, this case would probably have become another mysterious murder case in the history of the kingdom of Qing. The main reason was that the man Fan Xian had cut open like a pig was too famous, so it did not take too much effort to solve this case. At least, seeing that Director Qin and Master Fei of the Overwatch Council were not in a hurry to return to the capital, they knew that the matter was not very serious. The man was called Qing Jushu, a famous savage in northern Qi. His martial arts were hard to penetrate, and most importantly, he was extremely strong. His jinqi was vigorous, and he was one of the few 8th-level masters in the world. And the beautiful snake assassin, whose throat had been cut by Fan Xian, was an assassin from a small vassal state. The Overwatch Council secretly knew that this pair of beautiful assassins had always been under the control of northern Qi. So the case seemed to be completely clear. The mastermind behind this assassination was northern Qi, but it was unknown whether it was the young emperor or the highly respected imperial advisor Ku He. The people of the capital were in a heated discussion, wondering why northern Qi, although a sick tiger still had some power, would make a move against Fan Xian. Although Fan Xian had become famous in the capital as a poet, a playboy, and a savage in the eyes of the whole world, he was still an insignificant character. Northern Qi had sacrificed an 8th-level master and 2 female assassins in the vassal states just to kill Fan Xian, who had just arrived in the capital not long ago. This was something that was hard to explain. But for those who truly held power in the kingdom of Qing and had access to its secrets, Northern Qi had used a clever and ruthless move. It was unknown how their spies had found out that Fan Xian might take over the management of the royal business in the next few years, so he had become the target of the struggle between the crown prince and the second prince. If he was able to successfully kill Fan Xian and then escape far away, people would certainly suspect that this matter was done by the crown prince, who was unwilling to lose his source of money. Perhaps they would suspect that the second prince had purposely killed Fan Xian to frame the crown prince. Regardless of which speculation it would cause a ripple in the politics of the kingdom of Qing that no one knew what the outcome would be. Fan Xian was only an insignificant character, but his life and death was a big deal. Every time the officials of the Second Bureau of the Overwatch Council analyzed this, they admired their counterparts in northern Qi for coming up with such a beautiful plan. It was only a small move, but it could delay the kingdom of Qing's secret northern expedition. The matter of the northern expedition existed only in the military council's staff room, the Overwatch Council's planning room, and the emperor's mind. Whether to fight or not, it was the emperor's word. So northern Qi had always lived in this shadow. Their choice to strike at this time was a very smart move. Of course, the premise was that they could successfully kill Fan Xian without leaving behind any clues. However, northern Qi had not expected that this seemingly unremarkable character would possess such great power. The 4 bodyguards by Fan Xian's side were all Count Sinan's private collection, each of them at the 5th level of strength. That was why they were able to wipe out the archers despite being poisoned. Of course, the most frightening of all was the beautiful illegitimate son, who was able to kill 2 female assassins, famed for their poison, and the 8th-level master Qing Jushu. As for the sorcerer, no one cared. He was of little value. The Overwatch Council and the Ministry of Justice have jointly signed a report, confirming that it was Northern Qi who did it. The second prince arranged for you to meet on the Lujing River. He thought you liked Sea Lily, so he chose the Drunken Immortal Tavern. But no one could have guessed that the Drunken Immortal Tavern was a spy that Northern Qi had placed in the capital. Count Sinan sat in the dark bedroom looking at his son lying on the bed. He spoke calmly. I know you are angry, but since you are fine and those assassins died at your hands, this matter is over. It's over? Fan Xian felt a chill in his heart. Where is Sea Lily? On her way to the north, she was intercepted by the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council. She is currently being escorted back to the capital. I hope she doesn't die. Fan Xian's voice was cold. Count Sinan laughed. The people under the watch of the Overwatch Council never die so easily. Do you really think it's that simple? Fan Xian suddenly asked his father with a smile. Do you have a different opinion? Those archers, how did they sneak into the capital? I heard that the bodies of the archers were cremated the next day. Was someone afraid of finding something on them? Fan Xian turned his body with some difficulty. I know you don't want me to know these things. You're afraid I won't be able to resist seeking revenge. But I think I have the right to know who it is that wants my life. Count Sinan looked at him coldly. You should know that I represent His Majesty's secret power. Although it is not as strong as the Overwatch Council, it is sufficiently professional. But, we still have no way of finding out who is colluding with Northern Qi. The suspects are not limited to the Crown Prince and the Second Prince, but also the Prime Minister and the eldest princess. Since you can't find out who the real enemy is, then don't make too much noise. Don't make too many enemies for yourself. Count Sinan continued. This is my advice to you. I hope you will accept it. Fan Xian nodded. He touched the wound on his shoulder and frowned. He took 2 deep breaths. I will find a way to get to the bottom of this matter. Count Sinan was satisfied with his son's attitude. He said a few words of comfort and left the bedroom. After his father left, Fan Xian's eyes became quiet. He looked at a dark corner of the room and asked with a hint of resentment, Why didn't you do anything that day? Wuxia walked out of the darkness. His eyes were still covered by the black cloth. There was not a single wrinkle on the black cloth, just like his perpetually expressionless face. Chapter 91. Why should I do anything? Wuxia rarely asked rhetorical questions like this. Ever since Fan Xian left Danzhou and came to the capital, he seemed to have become even more mysterious than he had been in Danzhou. He had never seen Fan Xian face to face. Fan Xian's heart sank. Even if Wuxia had watched him grow up, Fan Xian had no reason to ask anything of him. In this world only he owed Uncle Wuxia. Wuxia saw that Fan Xian didn't say anything. He tilted his body slightly and said lightly, I've said it before. I've taught you for many years and Fei Jie has taught you as well. If you still can't deal with these small matters, then that's your problem, not ours. Afterwards, I found out that the big man was an 8th level master. Uncle, you said before that I was actually a 7th level master and had the power of a 3rd level master. I shouldn't have been a match for that big man. Fan Xian smiled bitterly. You said it was my problem. Did you not care if I was killed by someone else? Did you die? Wuxia asked a question with an obvious answer. It was a rare second rhetorical question. Fan Xian stared at the black cloth on his face and sucked in a breath of cold air. You were by my side the whole time? Yes. Then why didn't you do anything? Fan Xian lowered his voice and yelled angrily. Those 3 guards are dead. Teng Zijing is also injured. I've never cared about the life or death of anyone else other than you. Wuxia's words were cold and heartless. The people around you were gathered together because of you. If you want to control their lives, then you must protect them. So the life or death of those guards is your responsibility, not mine. Fan Xian once again sank into silence. He knew that Uncle Wuxia was right. I can't help you too much, Wuxia said coldly. Wuxia said coldly, on the cliff in Danzhou, I once said that if I were by your side in the capital, I would bring you trouble. Trouble that you would never want to face. Fan Xian smiled bitterly as he recalled that conversation when he was 12 years old. At the time he had said cheekily, I will protect you. But in the end it could only have been a joke. So remember, in the capital, I will never stand by your side under the sun, unless you are about to die or, you are already dead. Wuxia continued to speak expressionlessly. Fan Xian didn't understand what a powerful warrior like Uncle Wuxia was afraid of, but he heard the decisiveness in these words. There was no room for negotiation, so he nodded his head sadly. Someone's coming, Wuxia said quickly, then disappeared into the darkness once more. The visitor was a guest, but one that Fan Xian did not want to see. Crown Prince Jing Li Hongqing walked in with a gloomy face. He sat down on the edge of the bed and growled in a low voice, Do you know what happened today? The envoy from Northern Qi refused to admit it, and the agitated imperial students almost destroyed the office of the Grand Herald. The office of the Grand Herald was the diplomatic organization of the Kingdom of Qin. It was responsible for the exchange of money and documents with Northern Qi, various small kingdoms, and Dongyi, as well as other related matters. Hearing that the office of the Grand Herald had almost been destroyed, Fan Xian smiled bitterly. These young people are really hot-blooded. But, of course, Northern Qi won't admit it. If the people of the Kingdom of Qing found out that an enemy country could send assassins to assassinate people in the capital, I'm afraid there would be endless trouble between the two countries. Li Hongqing smiled bitterly. Trouble has already begun. His Majesty has already issued an edict. The envoy from Northern Qi and Yanjing has been driven out of the city, even their luggage. Fan Xian laughed mockingly. Dealing with outsiders is quite fast. Hearing the other meaning in his words, Li Hongqing frowned. I've been coming to see you for the past few days. You haven't recovered from your injuries, so there are some things I can't say. Fan Xian sighed. I don't know which life I've owed you. I treated you to a meal and then someone tried to assassinate me. After I came to the capital, I met you. You're the crown prince and you've always been straightforward. Why are you so hesitant today? Li Hongqing blamed himself. This is my fault. No one would have thought that the Drunken Immortal Tavern was a spy from Northern Qi. He thought for a moment. Today, I'm here to express my apologies on behalf of the second prince. He was going to visit you personally, but as you know, the situation in the capital has been rather muddled because of the assassination attempt on you. So, it's not convenient for him to come rashly. He smiled bitterly. You should know that many people are still speculating that the second prince and I were the masterminds behind your assassination, and that we were only trying to frame the crown prince. Fan Xian looked at him with a faint smile. Li Hongqing laughed. You're looking at me so mysteriously. Am I supposed to admit that I was the mastermind? Fan Xian also smiled. He believed that this matter was not done by the second prince, because losing the support of the Fan Manor was a loss that the second prince, who already had no strong support in court, could not afford to lose. At least, the benefits he would gain from framing the crown prince were far, far greater. With great difficulty, Fan Xian sat up on the bed. The servant girl helped him pour a bowl of water to drink. Seeing the figure at the door, he couldn't help but curse in his heart. He was clearly injured so badly, yet he kept receiving visitors. How could this be considered healing? This was clearly suffering. This time, however, the visitor was a stranger. He introduced himself as an official of the First Bureau of the Overwatch Council. He was currently investigating the assassination case on Yolan Street. Because this case involved officials of the court, and because there were rumors of some unclear background, all the files had been handed over to the Overwatch Council. How should I address you? A servant had already poured a cup of tea for the Overwatch Council official. Fan Xian squinted at him. This was the first time he had seen an official of the Overwatch Council anywhere other than the time he had bravely charged into the council. The officials of the Overwatch Council all seemed to have a deathly aura about them. This feeling made Fan Xian think of that accursed teacher Fei Jie again. I am Mu Tai. The official's lips were as thin as iron and his face was dark. Without any expression he replied, A few days ago, you were seriously injured, so there are some questions that I have yet to ask. Today I have come to ask. Please cooperate. Fan Xian frowned. It seemed that this official didn't know about the secret relationship between Fan Manor and the Overwatch Council, which was why he spoke like this. I'm tired. Let's talk another day. Mu Tai didn't seem to expect Fan Xian to refuse to answer his questions, and his expression turned ugly. Fan Xian waved his hand and asked curiously, The Council and the Ministry of Justice have already submitted the report. What else is there to ask? There are some things that are not clear. The official Mu Tai stared at Fan Xian's eyes. Fan Xian's heart jumped. He knew that the Overwatch Council was also suspicious of the archers, but what use was there in asking him? The only person he had offended in the capital was Guo Baoquan, the son of a mere civil official. He would not dare to collude with Northern Qi. As for the Crown Prince, that was something that even Fan Xian could not say. Fan Xian pulled out the token that Fei Jie had given him from under his pillow and tossed it over. We're all on the same side. If you have anything to say, just say it. Mu Tai's tea was untouched. He took the token and looked at it. His expression changed and he rose from his seat. He walked over to Fan Xian and knelt on one knee. He cupped his fists and bowed. Greetings, sir. Seeing Master Mu kneeling in front of him, Fan Xian was shocked. He hadn't expected the token to be so useful. He had no idea that the token Fei Jie had given him was a commissioner's token, an existence that was independent of the 8 bureaus of the Overwatch Council. Aside from Director Chen Zhang's direct orders, the Overwatch Council had the same rank as the heads of the 8 bureaus. So when Mu Tai saw the token, he couldn't help but be shocked. Fan Xian gestured for him to stand up. He frowned. When will Master Fei return to the capital? This was the question he was most concerned about. Although Wan Er's health was improving, the root of her illness could not be removed. He didn't know how long she would have to endure it. Secondly, the situation in the capital was complicated. Uncle Wu Zhu was still a ghost, and his father was still polite. Deep in his heart, Fan Xian trusted Fei Jie, but he wasn't in the capital. Hearing this handsome young man ask about Sir Fei, Mu Tai was certain that he was a powerful figure in the Overwatch Council. A secret service organization like the Overwatch Council always liked to develop spies in the various manors and departments of the capital. It was clear that this young master of Fan Manor was one of them, and he was of a particularly high rank. Mu Tai replied respectfully, "It should be a few more days." "Have you found anything yet?" Fan Xian stared at him. Mu Tai replied in a low voice, "The council received the news too late, so the bodies of the archers were all cremated. In the end, they traced it to the City Patrol Division and the trail was cut off." "The City Patrol Division? Who cares about that?" Jiao Ziheng. Mu Tai raised his head and looked at Fan Xian, curious that he didn't know Jiao Ziheng's identity. He replied, "He shouldn't be one of the Crown Prince's men." As soon as he saw the waste token which couldn't be forged, he determined Fan Xian's identity, so he spoke without hesitation. This was the style of the Overwatch Council. All the strict hierarchy only worked within the council. "You're in charge of this case?" Fan Xian looked at him curiously. "What rank?" "I'm a 7th rank official," Mu Tai replied with a smile. "Just an errand boy. When can see Lily enter the capital?" Fan Xian suddenly thought of his only witness and frowned. Those people ran fast. Even if they were stopped now, it would take a few days before they could return to the capital. Mu Tai looked at him, thinking that he had guessed why someone would collude with Northern Qi to assassinate this handsome young man. It seemed that this young man was a candidate for the council's training. Thinking of this, Mu Tai's heart warmed, as if he had found an opportunity to make a meteoric rise. He gathered his courage and asked, "Sir, although I don't know exactly what you're doing in the capital, you've only just arrived. If there's anything you need me to do, please let me know." Fan Xian asked curiously, "Then what about your current situation?" Mu Tai smiled. "I can transfer it to you immediately. The council has always been divided by rank. Given your status, it would be easy for you to transfer me here." Fan Xian immediately guessed what Mu Tai was thinking. He smiled bitterly. "Forget it. I don't even know what to do. If you follow me and lose your life for no reason, what good would that do you?" His heart suddenly darkened as he thought of the 3 bodyguards who had died on Yolan Street a few days ago. These bodyguards had been following him ever since he entered the capital, but before he could even remember their names, they were already dead. He asked a maid to open the window, and the light and cool breeze from outside rushed into the gloomy room. Fan Xian took a deep breath, roused himself and decided to do something. He asked the warm-hearted Overwatch Council official, "Is there a man named Wang Qinian in the council?" Chapter 92. Wang Qinian looked at the sesame seed cake stall in front of him and smelled the spicy aroma. His nose turned sour and he almost cried. Recently his life had not been good. He had been removed from the council. Not only had he lost his salary and pension, but more importantly, no matter which yamen it was, once they saw his record in the Overwatch Council, they would politely ask him to leave. And ordinary shops would not hire him, and he did not know how to use an abacus. He only knew how to use torture tools and he did not know how to do business. He only knew how to investigate cases. When he had first entered the Overwatch Council, he had been high-spirited and had cracked cases. All of the officials under him who had committed crimes had to confess their crimes. Who would have thought that one day he would be like a stray dog? Now he was old and he had a wife and children to support. Sigh. He left in a daze, feeling the few pieces of silver at his waist. He wondered who he had offended to end up like this. In fact, he also knew why he had been removed from the list. The cause was simple. He had heard that the master of 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 the Temple of Qin. The palace was furious and so they began to investigate. The Overwatch Council also began to help. Originally this matter did not have much to do with him. But no one could have imagined that after searching along the street, the Ministry of Internal Affairs would find out that the young man had gone to the Overwatch Council before entering the Temple of Qin. This was a big deal. Sir Qin was not in the capital, and the Overwatch Council was like a fatherless child. The high-ranking officials of the Overwatch Council thought that if the palace thought that the young man had something to do with the council, how could they explain it? At the end of the investigation they found Wang Qinian. Because after the young man entered the Overwatch Council, many officials testified that the young man had pulled Wang Qinian and said a lot. Wang Qinian accepted the investigation in confusion. He told them all about his conversation with the young man, but did not reveal the fact that the young man was Sir Fei's student. The Internal Affairs Bureau did not find any other problems with Wang Qinian, so they could only let it go. But they still found a random reason to kick him out of the Overwatch Council. It was like finding a scapegoat. Wang Qinian was pitifully chased out, but he still did not reveal the identity of the young man. He faintly knew that this matter was not as simple as it seemed. The young man might lack experience and carelessly reveal his identity, but he could not do so. Although losing his job was scary, offending Sir Fei was even scarier. This was something all the Overwatch Council officials knew very well. When Elder Fei returns, I'll go complain. Wang Qinian put on a long face, his head resting weakly on his towering shoulders as he walked into the distance. Brother Wang. An official from the First Bureau appeared from the corner of the street with a smile on his face and blocked his path. Wang Qinian took a closer look and recognized Mu Tai from the First Bureau. He had heard that Mu Tai was currently working with the investigation team for the Nyolan Street assassination case. Wang Qinian had barely spoken to Wang Qinian before. Why did Mu Tai have the time to look for him? Wang Qinian bowed with a face full of suspicion. Master Mu, what brings you here? Mu Tai's face was plastered with a flattering smile. Congratulations, Brother Wang, he said softly. He had originally thought that he could climb up to Fan Xian's high branch. He did not expect that he would be helping someone else instead. But seeing that Master Fan had entrusted this matter to him, there was always a chance that he could get closer in the future. Mu Tai had always been a dull man who devoted himself to official duties. But as he grew older he could no longer plan for his future. Seeing Fan Xian's waist token and connecting it with the words he had accidentally read while working on a certain case, Mu Tai had already decided that Fan Xian was a very thick thigh. That was why he was so respectful to Wang Qinian, who might be Master Fan's trusted aide. But Mu Tai had always been a dull man. Doing this for the first time, the flattering smile on his face was somewhat stiff and unnatural. Wang Qinian's heart trembled. Looking at the stiff smile on Mu Tai's face, he wondered if he was going to be silenced. Wang Qinian sat in a secluded room, his fears still lingering. He looked at the handsome young man in front of him. Even if he turned him to ash he would still recognize him. This was the young man who had caused him to be kicked out of the Overwatch Council. After seeing the waist token, Wang Qinian knew that he had made the right bet. This young man was clearly not only Master Fei's student, but had an even more frightening identity. Fan Xian had not expected this waist token to have such a powerful effect. He could not help but narrow his eyes as he recalled the time he had spent with Fei Jie. The cripple of the Overwatch Council was the person who had saved his life when he had just been reincarnated. It was clear that the Overwatch Council was taking care of him for his mother's sake. So he had to make good use of this advantage. Do you understand what I said? Fan Xian looked at Wang Qinian with a smile. This official was a little old and he had a wife and a son at home. He fit Fan Xian's requirements perfectly. Fan Xian had no experience in commanding subordinates, so he had to learn everything along the way. That was why he wanted his first trusted aide to be someone he had met by chance, and someone who was not too ambitious. I understand, Master Fan. Wang Qinian smiled. His fingers unconsciously pressed down on his belt. Aside from a few pieces of silver, there were already a few banknotes. No, it should be Master Fan. I've only just entered the capital, so I don't have any capable subordinates. Master is also not in the capital. Fan Xian thought for a moment. I still have a trusted aide named Ting Zijing, but he is currently injured. I don't think he will recover for a few months. In the future, when he is well, I will arrange for you to meet him. Yes. Wang Qinian did not say anything unnecessary. This was much better than when Fan Xian had first entered the Overwatch Council. Think of a way to find some people. This was the first time Fan Xian had tried to do something like this, so he felt a little unfamiliar. He could only learn step by step. Can people like you and me be transferred from the council? Wang Qinian suddenly felt a little uneasy. Master, I actually just left the council. Fan Xian was shocked. Could it be that things were going so wrong for him? What is the reason? Wang Qinian gathered his courage and told him about the Overwatch Council's internal investigation. He also told him about the Temple of Qing. He purposely hid Fan Xian's identity, to show his foresight and prematurely loyal. Fan Xian frowned and asked, "My current position is that of a commissioner. Can the power of a commissioner help you in this matter?" Of course. Wang Qinian was overjoyed. He now knew that he was following someone who was destined to be extraordinary in the future. "I just need to go through some procedures. Master, you can issue a warrant for me to return to my status as a member of the Overwatch Council, and then I can return to the council in a few days." "Very well, then I will take care of these matters immediately." Fan Xian looked at the old man and muttered to himself, wondering what use he would have for such a trusted aide. "What is Master Wang's specialty?" he asked gently. "Tracking and concealment." As soon as Wang Qinian mentioned his specialty, his spirits rose, and he spoke with confidence and assurance. After listening for a long time, Fan Xian realized that he had run into an extraordinary person. Wang Qinian had been a lone thief in the northern part of the kingdom of Qing when he was young. He loved to travel between the dozen or so vassal states between northern Wei and the kingdom of Qing. He would sell the goods he stole from country A to country B, and then sell the goods he stole from country B to country C. Because he never revealed the origin of his stolen goods, and because he was naturally good at hiding his tracks, he had been able to safely conduct his business for several years. Later, the officials of the small vassal states grew angry and joined forces to surround him. He had no way to use his methods and was forced to enter the kingdom of Qin. Unexpectedly, as soon as he entered the kingdom of Qin, he ran into Director Qin Pingping of the Overwatch Council, who had been planning the northern expedition with the emperor. He surrendered and became an official. Fan Xian looked him in the eye and said quietly, "See, Lily is being escorted back to the capital. Perhaps someone wants to intercept her, or perhaps someone wants to kill her. Whatever it is, don't worry about it. Just keep an eye on those people and see who they meet in the end." He paused, a little embarrassed. "As you said earlier, you are good at tracking, but your martial arts are poor, so I had to come up with this stupid idea." Wang Qinian smiled. "When I was young, the council wasn't as big as it is now. Zhong Jue and I were the two best at tracking in the council. Later, he stayed by the director's side and I became a little lazy, so I switched to a civilian job. But don't worry, master. Although I'm old, keeping an eye on a few people shouldn't be a problem. I have a lawsuit to attend, so I can't leave the capital. Otherwise, I would definitely go and see your skills." Fan Xian laughed. "Old Wang, I don't care about anything else. You have to take care of your old life first. That's the most important thing." After this matter was settled, Fan Xian hurried back to Fan Manor. Frowning, he asked his sister to fix his injured shoulder. He mixed some motherwort powder, which stopped the bleeding and regenerated muscle. It had a miraculous effect. He refused to let the doctors touch his wound. On the one hand, he didn't trust their ability to treat poison. On the other hand, Ruoro's slender and soft fingers were much more comfortable and lovely than the calloused bare paws of a rough man. Entering the study, Fan Xian saw Count Sinan's gray hair. With some difficulty, he bowed and said, "Father, I need some help." Fan Xian looked at him and couldn't help but smile. "Where do you want to keep an eye on?" "The eldest princess's guest house, the prime minister's servants' quarters, the crown prince's frequent brothel, the second prince's favorite polo ground, King Jing's grape trellis?" Fan Xian shrugged. "You know I'm not very professional when it comes to these matters, so I need you to help me find some professional people. Then they can make a decision on how to find the person behind the scenes." Fan Xian raised his index finger and shook it. "We don't need professionals. You're right about that. But we need to make arrangements. A group of professionals, under the direction of an inexperienced person, will not be able to do these things well. Father, please advise me," Fan Xian said sincerely. Fan Xian looked at him, then lowered his head to continue reading. "Actually, the places you mentioned are already being watched. I'm just curious. You haven't been in the capital for long. How do you know about these places?" Fan Xian smiled. He knew that while his father was outwardly urging him to be patient, he had already begun investigating in secret. It's easy to learn things by talking to the servants. Fan Xian didn't raise his head. His eyes were still on the book. "But you have to be prepared. The investigation in the capital won't yield any results." Fan Xian frowned. Fan Xian continued, "It still depends on Si Lily." He paused. "The two female assassins you killed, they seem to be the disciples of Sigu Jian of Dongyi. And I heard that Sigu Jian hasn't shown himself in Dongyi for a long time. You have to be careful." Fan Xian replied with worry, "If a great grandmaster focused on killing someone, who could avoid him?" Fan Xian nodded. But you probably don't have the qualifications for him to make a move against you. Don't worry. This is just some useful information. 10 days later, outside of Zhangzhou, about 500 miles to the north from the capital, a group of people were heading south against the cold morning wind. They were people from the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council. After 1,000 miles of pursuit, they had finally captured Sea Lily before she could escape the Qing kingdom. They were going to take her back to the capital to be interrogated. The group had been heading south for a long time. In a few days they would return to the capital. The leading Overwatch Council official handed a steamed bun into the prisoner's carriage. Eat this. Sea Lily's face was haggard. Her long hair was a mess and there was some dirt on her face. If Fan Xian had seen her now, he would never have guessed that she was the most popular courtesan in the capital who had shared a bed with him for a night. Sea Lily chewed on the hard steamed bun. She suddenly raised her face and gritted her teeth. Even if you take me back to the capital, I won't tell you anything. The official looked at her, his eyes full of mockery. You think we take you back to the capital because we want to find out something from you? I really don't understand. Do my colleagues in Northern Qi have nothing better to do? Why would they let an idiot like you stay in the capital? Sea Lily was indeed a spy from Northern Qi, but she usually met people in the guise of a courtesan. What kind of man would coldly call her an idiot? With a trembling voice she said, "Of course I know what you don't want to know from my mouth because if I tell you, I'm afraid the politics of the Qing kingdom will be in chaos for a while." The official said mockingly, "Actually, you had the best choice from the beginning. On the day of the assassination you should have surrendered instead of running away. That way you could accuse any official of colluding with Northern Qi, and it would have been enough to achieve Northern Qi's goal. But you ran away, which means that you value your life more than this mission." Sea Lily lowered her head, admitting this fact. Her fingers squeezed the hard steamed bun hard, leaving deep marks on it. Chapter 93. The official continued coldly, "We always knew that Drunken Immortal Tavern was your secret plot, but it was useless, so we just kept an eye on it. Who would have thought that you would be so daring as to do such a thing and then try to escape? How could there be such a simple thing in this world?" After Sea Lily and her party were captured on the border, she learned that their every move had been secretly observed by the Overwatch Council. She couldn't help but feel a chill in her heart. She was terrified of the Qing Emperor's secret agency. Seeing that the official was about to ride away, Sea Lily suddenly screamed, "You'd better kill me now. Otherwise, in a moment, that person in the court will come and save me." The official frowned and looked at her. He suddenly said, "It should be that person who will send someone to kill you." Just as he finished speaking, on the hillside in front of the prisoner carriage, there appeared, as everyone expected, people blocking their way. But no one had expected that the people blocking their way would be the horse gang, which bordered the northern border of the Qing kingdom and the small kingdoms. Although there were only a few dozen of them, they were angry and brandishing their knives. Against the Overwatch Council, which only had a dozen people, anyone with eyes could tell who would win this encounter. Although there were not many horse bandits, they dared to appear in a place only 500 li from Jingdo. Furthermore, the provincial soldiers guarding Jingdo did not know about it. If the people of the world knew, it would certainly cause an uproar in the court. Sea Lily's face had become deathly pale. Although she wasn't a smart person, she knew that if she fell into those people's hands, she would certainly be silenced. The official didn't seem to have imagined that the court official would have connections with the horse gang on the border. His expression seemed a little nervous. He approached the prisoner carriage and said, "Sea Lily, it seems that you and I will both die here. At a time like this, why don't you tell me which court official is colluding with Northern Qi? If a few of my subordinates manage to escape, they can report this to the court and avenge us." Sea Lily's long eyelashes drooped. Thinking that she was about to die here, she wanted to cry. She was about to speak when she suddenly thought of something strange. She raised her head and said coldly, "Sir, you're trying to scare me again." The official didn't seem to expect Sea Lily to see through his trick. He frowned imperceptibly. Sea Lily said sorrowfully, "Sir, you should know what kind of business I do. I've learned to read people's expressions since I was young." Sir's voice trembled a little, but your grip on the cart was steady and relaxed. Clearly you weren't worried. It seems like this ambush is something that you have long anticipated. Not bad. Only now did the official realize that this beautiful woman had the potential to be a spy. He smiled and said, "If we can't even guess something like this, then the Overwatch Council wouldn't be the Overwatch Council." While the two of them were talking, dozens of horses had already rushed down from the small slope. A silent murderous aura soared into the sky. This kind of formation was obviously not something that the horse gang should have. Around the prison carriage, the people of the Overwatch Council had already set up a semicircle of defense. However, there were too few people, so it looked sparse and pitiful. However, for some reason, in the face of the ferocious cavalry, these people's faces were filled with solemnity, as if they had already disregarded life and death. Hold! The leading official clenched his right fist and stared coldly at the approaching riders. His yell was in a neutral tone. If Fan Xian had been listening, he would have thought of the English word hold he often heard in movies in his previous life. The cavalry disguised as the horse gang came closer and closer. The leading official suddenly took a step back, straightened his right arm and roared, "Ready!" At this moment, the Overwatch Council soldiers, who had been in a semicircular defensive formation, suddenly changed their formation. They formed a sharp and sudden stance. Even more terrifying was that they had taken out hard crossbows from somewhere. Raising them level, they aimed at the riders in front of them. The distance between the two sides was too close. The leader of the cavalry had a strange look in his eyes. He pulled on the reins and sped up, making a turn and going around the front of the cavalry. To be able to suddenly accelerate and make a turn at such a high speed showed that his horsemanship was superb. Fire! As the leader of the cavalry pulled on the reins of his horse, the leading official of the Overwatch Council quietly gave the order. A volley of crossbow bolts flew out. Although they were not concentrated, the power of the springs made the bolts fly abnormally fast. They hissed in the air, sounding very frightening. There were a number of muffled grunts. The riders at the front were hit by the crossbow bolts and fell heavily to the ground. The riders at the back were ready to charge forward, but they did not expect the Overwatch Council to use repeating crossbows. This kind of repeating crossbow was a weapon that had only appeared in the world 20 years ago. The quiver could hold 8 crossbow bolts, and it was the most terrifying enemy of light cavalry. Seeing this formation and seeing the crossbow bolts coming at them, the cavalry suddenly panicked. They split into 2 groups and went around the prisoner carriage, preparing to take them in from the sides. If they had charged directly, perhaps the effect would have been better. But there were no ifs in this world. As they went around, a few more riders fell to the ground. Even more frightening, they found that there was an ambush behind the prisoner carriage. Seeing the attire of the ambushers, the group of riders disguised as mounted bandits suddenly lost their will to fight. They no longer cared about killing the women in the prisoner carriage, and they scattered in all directions. Lying in ambush at the back was a group of riders dressed in black armor. It was the same group that Fan Xian saw when he opened his eyes in this world. When Director Qin Pingping of the Overwatch Council left the capital to deal with council affairs, His Majesty had specially approved the personal cavalry of His Majesty, the Black Knights. The Black Knights silently charged forward, like a pack of wolves tearing into a flock of sheep. They surrounded the dozens of riders disguised as bandits and quickly killed them all. "Keep them alive! Keep them alive!" Fei Jie, who was sitting on the side of the carriage behind the Black Knights, saw this scene and anxiously cried out, "Don't kill them all." The curtain at the side of the carriage was lifted by a skinny hand. The old man in the carriage looked around and said coldly, "Fei Jie, you're really confused because of your concern. I'm afraid these little bastards don't even know who their master is. Just leave the leader alive." Fei Jie cursed. "Master Fan took advantage of our absence to get little Fan Xian into the capital. Something almost happened. How can I not be worried?" The old man snorted and smoothed out the wool blanket on his knees. "I was visiting my hometown," he lectured. "You wanted to sneak out of the capital. Who can you blame?" 10 years later, Fei Jie still looked the same. His hair was white and his eyes were brown. He frowned. "Who knows what Master Fan is up to? Master, when you return to the capital, you should have a chat with Count Sinan." This old man was Qin Pingping, who controlled the dark forces of the world. He smiled and looked at the confused cavalry leader in the distance. "Of course I understand what Fan Jian is thinking," he said lightly. "But what he is thinking is simply nonsense. If you want these things, you might as well not have them." He repeated, "Might as well not have them." Just as the two of them were talking, the leader of the riders had long fled into the distance. He quickly became a small black dot in the distance. It was clear that he had fallen into the Overwatch Council's ambush. However, even in death he did not understand why Qin Pingping, who was visiting his family in his hometown, would appear outside Sangzhou in the north of the Qin kingdom. When he saw the Black Knights, he knew he had lost. Facing the sinister and ruthless Director Qin, even his true master could only maintain his composure, let alone him. He had taken the initiative to escape, so he was farther away from the Black Knights. The Black Knights seemed to be tired after a long and arduous journey. After chasing for 2 li, they saw that the distance between them was getting farther and farther, and could only return to camp. Has Zhong Jue gone? Qin Pingping quietly asked one of his personal attendants. The attendant bowed and responded. At that moment, a gray rider came galloping out of the forest in the distance, quietly following the fleeing leader. That is not Zhong Jue. Fei Jie frowned. Qin Pingping stared at the gray shadow, and after a long time he suddenly laughed. Since he let us see him, he must be one of us. To be able to maintain the same level as Zhong Jue, I remember there was such a person in the council many years ago. Wang Qinian? Yes. Qin Pingping smiled. It seems that the young man we were worried about has finally learned something. After sending Wang Qinian out of the capital, Fan Xian could not show his face in public due to his injury, so he went to less of the planned bookstore and lived a life of seclusion. But now he had long become famous in the capital, especially those 2 poems that were completely inconsistent with his experience. They made him the center of controversy. Those who supported him saw him as a genius in the poetry world, while those who opposed him saw him as a representative figure who wrote new poems to express his sorrow, but no one knew that even these 7 words had been brought to this world by Fan Xian. There were also rumors of plagiarism in the dark, but 10,000 miles of sorrowful autumn is always a guest, was too dazzling, and no one dared to stand out and say that they had written it, so this rumor had not been brought to light. But Fan Xian knew that such a day would come. Because Guo Baoquan's father was the minister of the Board of Rights, and the Guo family was associated with the literary world, Fan Xian had never been afraid of using the worst of intentions to deduce so-called scholars. Because of the coexistence of controversy and reputation, there were often scholars who participated in the poetry meetings at King Jing's manor who would take the initiative to come to Fan Manor, in the name of visiting the young master who had survived a disaster. In reality, they were secretly handing over their poems, hoping to get a word or 2 from Fan Xian. Fan Xian always patiently received them, but he was very stingy with his evaluation of their poems. After all, he had long been prepared to leave the literary world and go into business like Zhang Xianliang. Moreover, he did not think he had the qualifications. He was only 16 years old, and was only relying on the wisdom of a sage from his previous life. Was he going to take in some poets? That was too absurd. Compared to his fame as a poet, what really made him famous in the capital and received the praise of most people was the assassination on Yolan Street. Some of the details of the case that could be known to the common people gradually spread from the Overwatch Council. As the victim, Fan Xian, in such a dangerous situation, not only was he able to preserve his own life, but he also fought back bravely, beheading the Northern Qi assassin with his bare hands. Furthermore, the assassin was an 8th-level master. This fact made Fan Xian rise to a new level in the eyes of the scholars in the capital. No one said that he was an underground fighter for the Fan family anymore. Everyone was talking about the young master of the Fan family, who was skilled in both literature and martial arts, and who had bravely killed the Northern Qi assassin. To be able to compose a poem in 7 steps and to be able to kill in 7 steps, that is Master Fan. Chapter 94. After the murder on Yolan Street, Fan Xian had been thinking about certain issues. Teng Zijing had already gone to the countryside to recuperate, and he didn't know if he would become disabled. The families of the 3 dead guards had received sufficient compensation, and even the relevant departments of the court had issued commendations. The guards were buried in the Fan clan's tomb on the outskirts of the capital. If Fan Xian could leave the capital, he would naturally pay his respects. The bloody facts had taught him that surviving in this world was not just a matter of romance. Naturally, it was not just about treating others to a meal. Therefore, he needed to have his own strength, such as Wang Qinian, Fan Xizhe, and his own martial arts cultivation. Now that he was in the capital, he changed his meditation time from noon to night. Every time he was half awake, he always felt the Jinqi in the snow-capped mountain behind his back like a pool of warm water, cleansing every part of his body comfortably. Vaguely, it seemed that the amount and density of this Jinqi had increased to some extent. Fan Xian still felt it was somewhat inconceivable that he had been able to kill an 8th-level master while being harassed by the 2 female assassins. He had investigated the Jinqi flow of Teng Zijing and the other guards, and found that no one in the world practiced the same way as he did. This realization did not make him feel the slightest bit panicked. Since he could rely on a slender dagger and a sleeve crossbow to kill an 8th-level master, it proved that his Jinqi was very useful. He was different from the martial cultivators of this world. In his mind, there was no such thing as an unbreakable barrier between levels. The bloody puddle of water with the big man proved that as long as you were ruthless and accurate, so what if you were one of the 5 great grandmasters? But there was still no progress on the second volume of the tyrannical scroll. Fan Xian's gaze fell on the box that had been casually tossed in the corner of the room. After coming to the capital, he seemed to have forgotten about the item his mother had left him. It seemed that he would have to find the key sometime. C. Lily, an important suspect in the assassination case, had not yet been escorted back to the capital when an imperial edict flashed across the sky like a bolt of lightning. This edict, issued from deep within the palace, was about Fan Xian. In the context of the previous day, the content of this edict was particularly different. By the will of heaven, the emperor has decreed. The eunuch's lips kept moving, but he couldn't make out what he was saying. Kneeling in the main hall of Fan Manor, Fan Xian was afraid that the eunuch in front of him would spit on his face. Frowning, he looked at the increasingly wet bricks in front of him. Finally, the imperial edict was read out. Under Lady Lu's instructions, Fan Xian followed the rules. After shouting "Long live the emperor," he thanked the eunuch and accepted the imperial edict. Lady Lu handed over a banknote without the slightest hint of anger. Only then did the eunuch leave, satisfied. "Where do we put this?" Fan Xian asked Lady Lu, holding the imperial edict in his hands. "We can't just keep holding it, can we?" Lu Shi took it with a smile. "Although the Fu often receives edicts, we can't say that it's just a toy. The Fu has a special room for it." Recently, Fan Xian and Lady Lu had maintained a subtle, superficial harmony between them. This was the result of the times, but neither side knew what would happen in the future. "To tell the truth, I've also studied scriptures, but why can't I understand what that eunuch was saying?" Returning to his bedroom, Fan Xian rebandaged the wound on his right shoulder. He looked at his sister, who was sitting at the table and looking at him with a faint smile. Eunuch Dai is from Yanwei, and his accent has always been difficult to understand. But these years he often comes to the Fu to announce edicts so I can understand a bit. Fan Xian hurriedly asked, "What did the imperial edict say? Why was it given to me?" Fan Ruoruo pursed her lips and smiled. Instead of answering directly, she said, "Actually, the palace has been rewarding the family for the past 10 years. Although father's title has been suppressed, my brother and I, and even Lady Lu, have all been rewarded. Now it seems that it's my turn." Fan Xian knew about these things. Even that little Fan Xixia had the title of Cavalry Commander of Grace. But this involved him, so he couldn't help but be curious. "I haven't returned to my ancestral home. Even if the palace wanted to reward me, there wouldn't be a title." "That's right. So this time His Majesty's edict only said that in the last incident, you killed an enemy spy or something. That was a meritorious service to the country, and so you were specially made a functionary of Taichang Temple." "Functionary of Taichang Temple?" Fan Xian's voice was filled with surprise. Taichang Temple was the place where the patriarch worshipped the temple. Although functionary was only an 8th-level official, he could enter and leave the temple at will. Ever since he and Lin Wanner had met, he had often guessed the identity of the noble who had worshipped the temple. Since it was Wanner's elder and Wanner had grown up in the palace, it seemed that the noble must have been some important person in the palace. Perhaps it was the Empress Dowager or the eldest princess. But when he visited Wanner a few nights ago, he knew that she was worried about the conflict of interest after her marriage, so he deliberately refrained from asking. Could it be that this edict contained some sort of meaning? Fan Xian frowned. If that important person was able to persuade His Majesty to make such an edict, it was to clarify what had happened in the temple that day. Then what was she thinking? Was it a show of goodwill? Or was it a demonstration? Fan Ruoruo saw him frowning in thought, and finally couldn't help but laugh. Pointing at her brother, she said, "Brother, when it comes to you, you're always confused. The functionary of Taichang Temple is an official position that every princess must assume before they marry." Fan Xian suddenly understood and smiled with some embarrassment. It seemed that the marriage had finally been decided. Then he remembered that because of his injury, he hadn't been to the royal courtyard for many days. Wanner must have been very worried when she found out about the assassination attempt. He didn't know if her condition had worsened. Would she be worried? Fan Xian suddenly felt a little confused. That icy woman had a mother like that and a father like that. Yesterday I asked my sister to go there for me. Did you deliver the letter? He asked, suppressing the slight uneasiness in his heart. Fan Ruoruo calmly replied, "Yes, she did." Sister-in-law listened to you, brother, and talked to that servant girl. Now she's secretly eating good food every day and her body is recovering well. She was just a little worried when she heard about the assassination attempt. But yesterday I was in a hurry and Yi Ling'er was by my side, so I couldn't write a letter. Fan Xian sighed and didn't say anything. Fan Ruoruo was the person who understood Fan Xian the best in the world. Hearing him sigh, she knew what he was worried about. Romeo and Juliet. Ruoruo had heard her brother tell this love story when she was young, and she remembered it. Smiling, she encouraged him, "Brother, you said that people should have the courage to pursue happiness." Fan Xian was very moved. He took his sister into his arms and patted her slightly thin back. "Don't worry. Those 2 people died from drinking poison, and the other committed suicide with a dagger. But your brother specializes in making poison and playing with daggers. It's very different. Are your injuries better?" Seeing the young man jump in through the window, Lin Wan-er felt sorry for him and let him lie down on the bed. "Why did you come here when you're in such a bad shape?" Fan Xian said bitterly, "I was worried about you and worried about me." Lin Wan-er's heart warmed. Hearing these 2 worries, she poured out the remaining tea in her teacup and brewed some new tea. Bringing it to his lips, she quietly said, "I listen to you. These days I've been taking good care of my body. You have to take good care of yours too." Fan Xian took the teacup with one hand and blew away the white mist. "How can a princess serve others?" he asked gently. Lin Wan-er bit her lower lip. "If you make me angry again, I'll throw you out. Are you willing to?" Fan Xian looked at her with a mischievous smile. "I've decided. After we get married, we'll go to a villa in the Tsang Mountains for the winter." Fan Xian leaned against the bed and looked at his fiancée, who was looking at him with a face full of worry. He smiled. "It's good for your illness, and I believe that before that, teacher Fei Jie should have returned to the capital. Don't just think about me." Lin Wan-er bit her lower lip. Her white teeth looked very cute against her red lips. What if something like this happens again in the future? Fan Xian couldn't remember how many times he had snuck into the boudoir in the middle of the night. The guards in the villa were truly unlucky. Not once had they discovered him, nor did they know that this pair of fiancé and fiancée were already so familiar with each other. Regarding this matter, Fan Xian had enough pride. Think about it, this was like a small palace outside of the imperial palace. In all of history, which thief could steal as much as he did? What else could have happened? Northern Qi isn't stupid. Since they've already been exposed this time, the court won't be fooled if they use the same method again. Lin Wan-er said worriedly. "I'm just afraid that there are some people in the court who would dare to attack you again because they'll use Northern Qi as a cover for future assassinations." Fan Xian had long known that his fiancée was a smart person. She had also grown up in the palace. Although she was loved by the Empress Dowager, she had grown up in a very complicated environment, so she knew more about officialdom than he did. Hearing her say this, he smiled and raised her soft chin, pinching it. "Don't worry. I firmly believe that I'm the luckiest person in the world." Lin Wan-er felt ticklish under her chin. She was both happy and nervous about this intimate action. Immediately, 2 patches of red appeared on her snow-white skin. She quickly pushed Fan Xian's hand away and said with some embarrassment, "People can't live by luck." Fan Xian loved seeing her bashful appearance. "I'm already lucky enough to have you. Having me, is that important?" Lin Wan-er lowered her head slightly. From this angle, her long eyelashes trembled slightly. She was clearly nervous. "It's very important." Fan Xian pulled her into his arms. He wasn't very good at sweet-talking, so he was also a little nervous. He clumsily tried to find her lips. Lin Wan-er felt a wave of manly scent hit her in the face. She couldn't help but feel her body soften. She leaned weakly against his chest. She turned her head and said softly, "Just who wants to kill you?" As she turned her head, she coincidentally avoided Fan Xian's wolfish kiss. Fan Xian was very angry, and hearing this question, his heart chilled. He hugged the soft body in his arms, and his hands unconsciously slid down her back. "Don't worry about it." Chapter 95. Lin Wan-er felt a tingling sensation on her back and couldn't help but laugh. "If it was my parents." She persisted. Fan Xian's hand, which had been enjoying the beauty of the woman in his arms, suddenly stopped. He looked at her seriously. "If it really was the eldest princess and the prime minister, what would we do?" Fortunately, when the 2 of them were talking about these things, their bodies were still very alluring, effectively diluting the seriousness and horror of the topic. After a long silence, Lin Wanner bravely looked into his eyes and wrapped her arms around his neck. If I marry you, I will be the daughter-in-law of the Fan family. Fan Xian understood the meaning of these words. Although the sweet night talk in the boudoir had been tinged with worry, he knew that his fiancée had grown up in the palace and had been brought up by the Empress Dowager. She rarely lived with the eldest princess, so the relationship between mother and daughter was a little distant. But hearing this answer, Fan Xian still found it difficult to extricate himself. This young man and woman had similar life backgrounds and growth experiences, so they understood each other's pain and pride. It was because of this that they had decided to spend the rest of their lives together in the Temple of Qing. How could there be feelings in the royal family? But Fan Xian had given this young woman an unprecedented emotional impact and gentleness, and Fan Xian himself had found space in this dark boudoir to rest his tired mind. When will you be able to go out for a walk? Fan Xian held her. Lin Wanner carefully lay on his left shoulder to avoid touching his wound. Hearing this, she replied helplessly, I've been in the palace since I was a child and rarely had the opportunity to go out. It was only 4 years ago that my uncle gave me the status of a princess that I had the opportunity to go out. But lately my body has been a little weak. She looked at him carefully. Do you think it's too improper to be so sneaky all the time? Fan Xian was startled. He lowered his voice and laughed. I like this kind of sneaky feeling the most, but with your illness you still need to move around and bask in the sun. Hearing him admit that he liked this kind of sneaky feeling, Lin Wanner couldn't help but think of how absurd she had been these nights, letting this young man lie next to her. Her cheeks couldn't help but burn. She spat and said, Then tomorrow I'll go to the palace and ask my uncle. Uncle? Fan Xian heard her address him so intimately and couldn't help but laugh in a low voice. Yes, our uncle is the most powerful emperor in the world. With a word from him you are my wife. It was only then that Fan Xian remembered and told them about the imperial edict. Hearing the contents of the imperial edict, Lin Wanner knew that the man next to her had already been conferred the title of functionary of Taichung Temple. She knew that this marriage had finally been decided. She was pleasantly surprised but couldn't help but feel embarrassed. Fan Xian smiled slightly at the blush on her face. He thought to himself that this girl was gentle and intelligent, yet she was so shy. In the end, he still thought that the women in this world were the same as the women in his previous life. He never thought that he would climb the wall in the middle of the night. For a dignified princess, it was already a big deal. By the way, when we first met at the Temple of Qing, who were you with? With His Majesty, Lin Wanner replied curiously. Ah. Fan Xian thought of how he had brushed shoulders with the emperor, and couldn't help but feel something different. Since that person was His Majesty, then the ace who had exchanged blows with him was naturally the head of the palace guards. Thinking of how he had only spat out a few mouthfuls of blood after exchanging blows with the head of the guards, he couldn't help but feel a little proud. Lin Wanner saw the changing expressions on his face and became interested. She stared into his eyes and asked, What? Are you surprised? I can only blame myself for being stupid. I didn't think of going there. Fan Xian smiled bitterly. I always thought it was the Empress Dowager or the eldest princess. Alas, after coming to this world, if I didn't even see the emperor, it would be too much of a pity. Although I don't pay much attention to the outside world, I know that the Fan family is very favored by the emperor. If you want to see His Majesty, it won't be difficult. Besides, the girl lowered her head shyly. After the wedding, I will have to go to the palace to pay my respects to my uncle. Hearing the word wedding, and seeing the girl's shy expression, Fan Xian's heart skipped a beat. Holding Lin Wanner's left hand, he sneakily slid down, following her waistline all the way down. Finally he touched that soft and plump place. His heart skipped a beat and gradually became lascivious. He rubbed his palm over and over again only to feel smooth and soft under his palm. It was very pleasing. The reason why Lin Wanner had endured her shyness and allowed Fan Xian to accompany her in bed every night was because she realized that her elegant and refined fiancé was a gentleman. After so many days, he had only tasted her and left satisfied. He had never done anything too out of line. Only then did Lin Wanner relax, and in the depths of her heart, she felt inexplicably proud. She hadn't thought that today, after being injured, he would become lustful. So when Lin Wanner felt her buttocks being rubbed by that hand, she didn't react for a moment. She stared stupidly at Fan Xian for a few seconds, watching as the desire in his eyes grew stronger and stronger. Only then did she come to her senses with a soft cry. Her face was flushed red, and she reached behind her to pull away the other's perverted claws. Fan Xian had long since lost his mind. How could he let her go? He turned to the side and pulled her into his arms. His right hand was injured, so he wrapped his legs around the struggling girl like a large koala bear. He lowered his head and kissed her on her sandalwood lips. As soon as he touched her, it was moist and warm. After a long time, the two of them slowly separated. Fan Xian felt relaxed and happy and didn't know what to say. Lin Wanner's eyes gradually became misty, but they were hazy with tears. She was so embarrassed that she almost cried. Fan Xian looked at Lin Wanner's expression and was stunned for a moment. He didn't know what to say. He quickly smiled and explained, I couldn't control it. I couldn't control it. You're a bully. Lin Wanner sobbed, but she didn't dare to disturb the guards in the garden or the old nanny downstairs, so her voice was quiet. When did I do that? Fan Xian felt wronged. They were almost husband and wife, so what was wrong with a little intimacy? As if guessing what the young man was thinking, Lin Wanner puffed up her cheeks and said, There are still a few months. Fan Xian looked at her with a mischievous smile and said, We've already spent so many nights together. Why should we care about that? Lin Wanner was most afraid of this saying. Hearing him say it, she was extremely embarrassed. She clenched her fists and threw them at him, but halfway through she remembered that he was injured, so she could only pull them back. Who would have thought that when she turned around she would accidentally bump into something indecent? No matter how gentle and composed Wanner was, she knew what was going on. She couldn't care less about Fan Xian's injury. She pushed him away from the bed curtain. Go back early. I'm still injured. Lin Wanner buried her face in the blankets, not daring to look at him. Fan Xian's gaze naturally fell. He looked at himself and said, Then I'll come see you tomorrow. Lin Wanner pulled down the blankets a little, revealing her pitiful face. She begged, Don't you have official business tomorrow? All right. The bookstore opens the day after tomorrow. Fan Xian remembered that the people from the Overwatch Council had not returned to the capital yet. There was nothing to be found in the capital. Since that was the case, he might as well do what he needed to do. Sharpening a knife doesn't delay cutting people down. Could this count as one of his good qualities? He couldn't bear to bully this girl anymore, so he opened the window and prepared to leave. The moonlight shone in and shone on the bed as well as on the sleeping servant girl. Fan Xian couldn't help but snicker. He wondered if this servant girl would grow fatter in a few days, since she slept so well every day. The next day the bookstore opened for business. Dongchuan Road was bustling with people. Even the nearby Imperial College had a rare trend of truancy. The buildings on the side of the street were decorated with lanterns and streamers. The square front was completely wrapped in high-quality wood. It shone brightly in the jet-black darkness. It was truly a very bookish decoration. Unfortunately, there were too many people today and the smell of sweat replaced the scent of books. Most of the people who came were here to see Fan Xian. Everyone was curious as to how the illegitimate son of Fan Manor, who had only been in the capital for a little more than a month, could do so well. They were even more curious as to why a noble young master who was skilled in both literature and martial arts would want to open a bookstore. There were many profitable businesses in this world, and selling books did not seem like a good way to make a living. Ever since the assassination, Fan Xian's view of life had changed a lot, so this bookstore did not hide behind the scenes. Instead, it stood out in the open and admitted that he and his brother were the owners of this bookstore. He also gave the bookstore a name, Danbo Bookstore. He also asked the Crown Prince to go home and have King Jing personally write the name. Only then did he make a horizontal plaque and hang it on the door. The people around him were suspicious as to what the bookstore's name meant. Fan Xian explained that it was Danbo to show one's will. In fact, it meant, do not be troubled, do not worry, and do not lose one's will. He then threw out Zhuge Liang's phrase, do not be Danbo to show one's will. Without tranquility one cannot go far. When the Crown Prince first heard this explanation, he was also shocked. He thought that Fan Xian was using this to confess to the people of the court that he did not want to meddle in anything, and that he was showing weakness in exchange for safety. In fact, only Fan Ruoruo understood her brother the best. She knew that Danbo meant that he had once drifted in Danzhou. Seeing that more and more people were gathering around, Fan Xian's forehead began to sweat. He muttered to the shopkeeper next to him, I was talking about advertising. The effect was a bit too good. How come there are so many people just opening today? Shopkeeper Yi is no stranger to the word, advertisement. He laughed and said, I heard that the owner has Mr. Chao's manuscript in his hands. After the 68th chapter, we are the only ones to publish it. Just the reputation of Story of the Stone is enough to attract so many people. He paused then laughed. Of course, Everyone is mainly here to see you. They want to see what a young poet who can kill an 8th level master looks like. Fan Xian was startled. I'm not 8 feet tall and I'm not 8 feet wide. What's there to see? Chapter 96. Whether Fan Xian was willing or not, people came in droves to congratulate him. Perhaps it was because they had found a rare opportunity to get closer to Assistant Minister Fan, or perhaps it was because they knew that the emperor had already made Fan Xian a functionary of Taichung Temple, and that his marriage to someone in the palace was imminent. All the officials gave him face and sent their subordinates to congratulate him. Even the manors of the princes and dukes sent people to deliver gifts. On Dongchuan Road, there was an endless stream of sedan chairs, and the sound of greetings could be heard everywhere. Gift boxes almost filled the entire meeting room. The onlookers on the street clicked their tongues in wonder. It was just a bookstore, and yet it had caused such a commotion. This Master Fan, who excelled in both the pen and the sword, was no ordinary person. The biggest benefit of the opening scene was that from now on, Dombo Bookstore would no longer have to worry about being harassed by the people of the underworld, and there would be very few official problems. Fan Xian calmly looked at the scene and cupped his hands in greeting to the guests. He knew that most of them had come for his father's sake. Fortunately, the bookstore was too small, and the guests were not important people. They only chatted for a bit, and after explaining which family they were from, they took their leave. After these people left, they were still a bit suspicious. Why was a member of the Fan family doing business? It should be noted that being a merchant was not a very honorable job. At that moment, Crown Prince Jing Li Hongqing finally arrived. The people on the street who knew who he was all bowed to him, and he returned their greetings with a warm expression, without a trace of the arrogance of a member of the royal family. His face was like a spring breeze and he was very scholarly. Seeing him enter the store, some passers-by asked curiously, "This Dombo bookstore has quite a bit of face. King Jing and the Fan family have always had a good relationship, don't you know?" Fan Xian saw that he had arrived and his heart trembled. Such a gentle person like the spring breeze was willing to rush forward for the sake of the second prince. What kind of person was the second prince? He smiled and shook his head, driving all these thoughts out of his mind. He walked out of the store. He still wanted to have a simpler relationship with Li Hongqing. The two of them entered a quiet room in the back. Li Hongqing looked around at the decorations and sighed. "Looks like you really did invest a lot of money. I only took 1,700 taels of silver." Fan Xian poured him a cup of tea. "Small business, not worthy of the crown prince's attention." Li Hongqing accepted the tea and shook his head. "You people of the Fan family are the best at making money. This is something all the officials know. But Count Sinan earns money for the court while you earn it for yourself. It's not the same." Fan Xian smiled. "When you earn money you have to pay taxes to the court. Even if you earn some for yourself, you can't keep it in your hands and let it rust. If you take it out and use it, you'll be helping other people's businesses. If other people's businesses are doing well, the court will pay more taxes. Therefore, no matter where you do business, as long as you can make money, the money will eventually go to the imperial court, and in the end it will be used on the people." Li Hongqing was a little confused, but he seemed to understand a little. He clapped his hands and sighed in admiration. Just a few words, but they seemed to make a lot of sense. The court has always respected agriculture and restrained commerce. I was wondering why you chose to make a living like this, and whether you had no intention of becoming an official. So that's how it is. Fan Xian felt very embarrassed. In his previous life, when he wasn't sick, he could only score from the bottom in political economy. It was just idle chatter. How did it become sense? He quickly stopped and changed the subject. All right. What career? I only wrote 2 crooked poems. I'm going to be a deserter in next year's competition." Li Hongqing, who had been troubled by Fan Xian's strength of character for a long time, finally used his fan again in front of him. He incessantly fanned his neck and laughed. "If you write a crooked poem, how are you going to let those people in the Imperial College live? Look, there were so many students outside who wanted to pay their respects to the great poet Fan. If it weren't for your servants blocking the way, I'm afraid it wouldn't have been so peaceful." Fan Xian's face was full of worry. "Those students of the Imperial College, some of them old enough to be my grandfather, still call me a student. I can't take it anymore." Li Hongqing laughed and pointed his fan at him. "Your face is full of worry, but your words are so mischievous. You really are an interesting person." Fan Xian rolled his eyes. What was so interesting about him? He asked, "I troubled you to write these words. When will you take me to your manor to pay my respects to the old man?" Li Hongqing was startled. He remembered that the young man in front of him didn't even know that his father had met him before. He smiled and didn't point it out. He was ready to laugh at the young man of the Fan family in the future. Whenever you want to go, go. There's no need to say anything to me. Crown Prince Jing Li Hongqing had always felt that Fan Xian was far more mature than he had been at 16 or 17. He wasn't impervious to praise or humiliation, but at least he was unusually calm. He had always wanted to see through Fan Xian's calmness. Suddenly he clapped his hands. Right, I forgot to congratulate you, brother Fan. Fan Xian was startled. He didn't know what to congratulate him about. Li Hongqing stood up. Congratulations on receiving the position of functionary of Taichang Temple. The birds at the gate are chirping. You must drink with them. Fan Xian laughed. So that's what it is. You should have known about it a long time ago. In the past it was only a rumor in the palace. It didn't come to pass, so of course it doesn't count. Li Hongqing seemed to be thinking of something, and his brows suddenly furrowed. He suddenly thought of something. The second prince and he had always thought that even if the Fan family didn't side with him, they wouldn't stand on the side of the crown prince. But they seemed to have overlooked a very important issue. After Fan Xian got married, his wife was the illegitimate daughter of the prime minister. It was hard to say that she wouldn't slowly lean towards that side. So he suddenly lowered his voice. See, Lily is going to be escorted back to the capital. Perhaps we'll be able to find out who is colluding with Northern Qi. Fan Xian had no idea that in the blink of an eye, Li Hongqing had thought of so many things. He was slightly startled and then smiled bitterly. I'm just an ant. I just hope that the nobles in the court don't care about me. Li Hongqing looked at him. He knew that Fan Xian wasn't telling the truth, but he didn't point it out. He smiled. In short, it's the same as when you beat up Guo Baoquan. If you need me to do anything, don't be shy. Of course, Fan Xian replied. Then he changed his mind and said something else. I plan to open a tofu shop in the south of the city. Are you interested in buying a share? Li Hongqing was drinking tea and almost swallowed it. He tidied up his clothes in a fluster. A tofu shop doesn't make much money, he said. At least a bookstore makes money from books. That's sour money. Fan Xian chuckled and ignored him. He thought that he would wait until the time came to deliver the freshly squeezed soy milk to the prince's manor. When he was in Danzhou, he had eaten a lot of tofu, but because of the different eating habits of the seaside, he rarely drank soy milk. After coming to the capital, he had drunk it a few times, but he always felt that there was too much residue. He didn't know if it was a problem with the process, so he decided to improve it. At dusk after school, Fan Xizha finally sneaked in through the back door. After being taught a lesson by Fan Xian last time, he had also taught a lesson to his schoolmate. He felt good, so going to school didn't feel like a chore. But today was the opening of the bookstore. From choosing the location to choosing the paper, from hiring the shopkeeper to setting the price, everything had been handled by him. He couldn't help but be nervous, so he came early. As soon as he entered the bookstore, he sighed for not being able to see the grand scene of the day. Then he dove into the accounts room. Fan Xian drank tea and waited for him. After a while, Fan Xizha walked out, his face full of confusion and innocence. Fan Xian was shocked. What happened? He asked. Fan Xizha mumbled for a long time. Finally, he caught his breath and scolded, We earned a lot more than we thought. Is that so? Fan Xian had thought that it would be good to have some business on the first day of the store's opening. He hadn't expected this. He took the account book from his brother and looked at the figures. His heart couldn't help but tremble. Not to mention the fact that the detailed edition of Story of the Stone had sold more than 80 copies. Even the collection of classics and histories that Wansong Hall had asked to be printed on their behalf had been bought by many scholars. Fan Xian counted on his fingers. He felt that doing business was really something that gave him a sense of accomplishment. Today is the opening. Many people who are friends with our family have come to support us. Naturally, there won't be such a good thing in the future. Fan Xian looked at Fan Xizha, whose eyes had become like copper coins, and carefully reminded him. Fan Xizha swallowed and looked at his brother enviously. Big brother, I know. But you can sit in the bookstore every day and I can only hide. I really envy you. Fan Xian laughed. Do you like being a businessman that much? Father's title is still waiting for you to inherit. Study hard, and in the future you may be in charge of all the money in the court. Then I'll have to be the Minister of Revenue. Fan Xizha's face was gloomy. Father was a third-ranked official, but he's still just an assistant minister. That old minister has been bedridden for years, and the court hasn't let him take his place. At most, I can donate some scholarly honors. I'm afraid that's not going to happen. Fan Xian looked at his brother with some surprise. Although this kid was stubborn and unbearably bad, he was unexpectedly shrewd when it came to looking at things. After thinking for a moment, he said, "If you want to do business, then do it. I'll talk to father." Fan Xizha was overjoyed, but he suddenly frowned. But what about mother? Fan Xian's heart skipped a beat. He thought of Lady Lu, whom he hadn't thought about for a long time. Fan Manor in the capital seemed to be happy and harmonious, but who knew how long this seemingly wonderful situation would last? Chapter 97. Fan Xian held Xizha's hand as they walked out of the bookstore. Suddenly he thought of something. He turned around and said to shopkeeper Yi in a sincere tone, "About the matter we talked about a few days ago, I would like to trouble you to arrange it." Shopkeeper Yi did not understand why this young master was interested in the survivors of Qingyu Hall, but he still nodded in agreement. The 17 shopkeepers had long since grown accustomed to life in the capital, working for various manors. Although they could not run their own businesses, their lives could be considered wealthy. Fan Xizha asked curiously, "Big brother, what arrangements? Do you know what kind of place Qingyu Hall is?" "Of course I do." Fan Xizha had offered a large sum of money to hire this shopkeeper Yi, so of course Fan Xizha knew about him. He said, "These are the shopkeepers of the Yi family. If I could run a business and have a group of capable people, how great would that be?" Fan Xian was startled. He increasingly felt that he had been too careful. It seemed that the name of the Yi family had long since become a thing of the past. The people of the capital no longer saw it as some sort of taboo. When he boarded the carriage that had come to pick him up, he found Ruoruo waiting inside. Fan Xian blamed himself. "If I had known you were coming, I would have come out earlier." Fan Xizha looked at his sister and felt an inexplicable fear. "I just came to take a look. This business has nothing to do with me. Don't tell father." Hearing this, Fan Ruoruo's originally indifferent face showed a trace of a smile. "We're all family. Who would want you to be flogged?" Dongchuan Road, which had been noisy during the day, was now quiet. Fan Manor's carriage rattled toward the eastern part of the capital. That was the home of the 3 boys and girls in the carriage. The sun was setting and the carriage's shadow was long. It slid forward on the flagstones of the street, bouncing up and down as the flagstones rose and fell. It seemed as if it were struggling to escape the coolness of the flagstones and plunge into the fiery red of dusk. It was still the same old saying. Fan Xian felt that his current family life was quite happy. Happiness was such a thing. Since he had already grasped a few strands of hair in his hands, he had to hold on tighter. So Count Sinan, Fan Jian, was constrained by his official status and was unable to find out the truth of the assassination attempt against him, so he had to endure it for now. However, Fan Xian was currently a free and unfettered person, so he had no misgivings. In order to complete the 3 goals of his rebirth, he could not accept being in an unsafe environment. In his previous life, the United Nations had once said that people should have the freedom to be free from fear. Although Fan Xian did not understand politics, he thought to himself, even if I wear it, I still have human rights, right? Wang Qinian sat at the table, his face ashen. He had rented this house with Master Fan's banknotes before he left the capital. It was in an inconspicuous location and no one should have noticed it. Fan Xian quickly pushed the tea over and said, "You've worked hard." Seeing him use honorifics, Wang Qinian didn't dare accept it. He hurriedly reported the mission. As you expected, when Si Lily and her party returned to the capital, they were intercepted. However, the council was prepared and defeated the enemy in one fell swoop. According to Master's orders after leaving Tsangzhou, I have been following the troops in the council. Those people who tried to intercept us were disguised as horse bandits, but looking at their movements they should be soldiers. Fan Xian was startled. How did the military get involved? He carefully asked, "Is it the provincial government army or what?" "I'm not sure." Wang Qinian thought for a moment, then said, "According to Master's orders, we only followed them. In the end, we discovered that the leading officer had escaped to Wuzhou." Wuzhou. Correct. That night, the officer met with the Wuzhou army. Wang Qinian suddenly remembered that there were some things he had to explain. He quickly said, "Actually, there was someone else who followed them with me." "Oh, Zhong Jue." Fan Xian suddenly understood. "You once said that Zhong Jue who was as famous as you were back then. Didn't you say that he was always by Master Chen's side?" He suddenly understood. It seemed that, like him, the Overwatch Council was also using Si Lily to track down clues behind the scenes. "Yes. That day I saw Director Chen's carriage from afar. The Black Knights were also there. Otherwise there was no way they could have resisted the cavalry. Wang Qinian was a little embarrassed. Master Fan, since the council is already investigating, should we continue? Let's not rush into this. Who in the court is the Wuzhou army subordinate to? They are very careful. The army officer's surname is Fong, and his first name is Xiao. He doesn't have much of a background, but he is a distant relative of General Fong of the City Patrol Division. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and thought. The City Patrol Division must have played a dishonorable role in this matter. But how should he dig further? In other words, should he really continue digging? If too many important figures were involved, it would be difficult to clean up the mess. He who had been promoted by the court as a heroic figure might be forced to play another role. He took a deep breath. His lips were a little pale. When will see Lily arrive? He asked quietly. Tomorrow. Wang Qinian looked at him and suddenly said, the director is also returning to the capital tomorrow. Master Fan, should we first ask for the director's permission before asking for C. Lily to be interrogated? What about Master Fei? I don't think so. Hearing that Fei hadn't returned to the capital, Fan Xian was a little disappointed. But thinking that Chen Pingping would be returning soon, his spirits rose. The Overwatch Council had been created by his mother. Although so many years had passed, people's hearts would always change. But the scene he saw when he was born into this world and his teacher's careful teaching made Fan Xian believe that the Overwatch Council was not an enemy or a friend. It was one of his own. At this moment he felt like a motherless child who was being bullied, and suddenly a large group of burly uncles came to help him fight. The little fellow wiped away the dirty tears on his face as he thought, F***CKU, who else in the capital would dare to bully me in the future? At that moment Wang Qinian suddenly laughed. Congratulations, master. It seemed that even he, who had just returned to the capital, knew that Fan Xian had become functionary of Taichang Temple. It was just that most people didn't know who he would marry in the palace. Fan Xian smiled helplessly and didn't say anything. There was a saying in the officialdom of the kingdom of Qing, there is nothing in the world that the Overwatch Council can't find out, even if it's the silver you hide in your chamber pot. Fan Xian also believed this. Although his father's subordinates hadn't found any clues, if there was anyone in the world who could find out, it had to be Chen Pingping. For the sake of safety, Fan Xian had Wang Qinian temporarily stop his activities. He only had him arrange for some people to closely follow the council's every move. The entire officialdom reacted to Director Chen's return to the capital. It was said that the night Chen Pingping returned, he was summoned to the palace by the emperor. After a long night of discussion, the emperor let the tired Chen Pingping return to his manor. The civil and military officials were envious of Chen Pingping's undiminished royal favor, but they also silently cursed that the old man had fallen ill from overwork and should have retired. While the director was in the palace, the Overwatch Council's operations were carried out in an orderly manner. That night, a large group of officials from the First Bureau of the Overwatch Council broke into the city patrol yamen with a murderous aura and began to search. Another group headed straight for the manor of the general in the south of the city. On a tall tree outside the brigadier general's manor, Fan Xian held the branch firmly with both hands. The zhenqi in his body slowly flowed, quietly disappearing into the dense foliage. His eyes were cold as he looked at the chaos in the manor. Not long after the operation was over, the disappointed officials of the Overwatch Council retreated from the back courtyard, bringing with them a disappointing result. General Fong Darren of the city patrol had committed suicide to escape punishment. Just an hour before the Overwatch Council arrived, he had hanged himself from a beam. Fan Xian sighed and waited for the crowd to disperse before slipping down the tree. Walking on the quiet night street, he was still thinking about this matter. Fong Darren was a military general. Even though his collusion with Northern Qi had been exposed and he had chosen to commit suicide, pulling out a knife and cutting his own throat seemed to be more in line with a martial man's personality. His death by hanging was too full of resentment in the palace. It was probably not something he was willing to do. His heart jumped and he could no longer restrain himself. He went to the address Wang Qinian had left him. The Wang family's house was in an ordinary alley in the south of the city. At night, the men would lie outside in the shade and sip tea, but the wives of the wives would be locked up. Fan Xian walked along the street inconspicuously, found the right place, and disappeared into the dark corner of the alley. Although Wang Qinian was a low-ranking official, he was still a member of the Overwatch Council. The reason why he seemed so poor after his resignation was because he had used all his savings to buy this small courtyard. When Fan Xian entered the courtyard, Wang Qinian was looking at his son with a face full of love. He was fanning himself with a large palm leaf fan. Hearing some movement, he alertly turned his head and saw Fan Xian's clean and beautiful face. He couldn't help but be shocked. Shoo! Fan Xian gestured to him and quietly followed him to a quiet place. Wang Qinian didn't think that after reporting to the young man earlier in the day, Fan Xian would immediately come looking for him again. With a face full of suspicion he asked, "Sir, what happened?" Fan Xian told him about Fang Daren's suicide. Wang Qinian frowned. "They acted quickly. This is going to be difficult. Take me to the prison. I want to see Lily," Fan Xian said. "The council is investigating. If we interfere now, won't it cause a misunderstanding?" Wang Qinian was more thorough in his considerations than Fan Xian. Fan Xian thought for a moment, then said helplessly, "Sir Chen has been summoned to the palace. I'm afraid something might happen in the prison." Wang Qinian thought that he really had to hurry. "Sir," he said respectfully, "it's best if you don't get involved in these matters. Let me handle it." Fan Xian shook his head. "Let's go together." To tell the truth, he had always been curious about the Overwatch Council's prison. Of course he was also curious about Sea Lily. It was already night in the capital. In the darkness that was as thick as ink, there was a sprinkling of light. The Lujing River was the brightest, followed by the alley. And the darkest place among the ink was the Overwatch Council. That night, Wang Qinian led a mysterious man in a gray robe into the Overwatch Council's prison. Chapter 98. Because the Overwatch Council was directly under the command of the Emperor, the Kingdom of Qing's celestial prison was not in the Ministry of Justice, nor was it in the Supreme Court. Instead, it was here where serious criminals were kept and security was particularly tight. The celestial prison was not far from the Overwatch Council, just around the corner. If anything happened, they could immediately provide assistance. Wang Qinian, at least on the surface, was no longer a member of the Overwatch Council. But with the token in Fan Xian's hand, the two of them easily gained the trust of the guards and entered the celestial prison. The two iron doors of the celestial prison opened without a sound, without the eerie grinding sound that Fan Xian had imagined. The guards carefully examined the tokens, then respectfully invited the two of them in, and closed the iron doors from the outside. Behind the iron doors was a long corridor leading downward, lit by dim oil lamps on both sides. The stone steps were slightly slippery, but there was not a speck of moss on them. It seemed that they had been carefully taken care of. As they walked down, they saw a guard every few steps. They looked unremarkable, but upon closer inspection, Fan Xian found that they were all at least of the 4th level. After walking for an unknown period of time, the air became a little turbid. It blended with the turbid lights in the surroundings, causing one's senses to become a little sluggish. It was as if this place had already broken away from the fresh and clean mortal world, and had already reached the Yellow Springs evil land. "Sir, please show us the relevant documents or edicts from the inner palace." A muddy jailer glanced at Wang Qinian. Wang Qinian was very respectful to the jailer, and handed over Fan Xian's token. The head jailer looked very old. The wrinkles on both sides of his cheeks had been squeezed into ridges. He took the waist tag and looked at Wang Qinian with a strange expression. "Little Wang, you've been promoted?" Wang Qinian respectfully stepped to the side, revealing Fan Xian, who was completely covered in a gray robe. "Today I accompanied this sir to the trial." The jailer realized that he could not see their faces clearly, but he knew the weight of the token in his hand. He nodded, took out a key from the table, opened the door next to him and waved for the two of them to enter. Fan Xian frowned, wondering if he would have to ask Sea Lily through the bars. He did not want to expose his voice in front of too many people, so he turned around and gave Wang Qinian a look. Wang Qinian smiled and shook his head. Seeing the metal door close behind him, Fan Xian asked curiously, "Why are you afraid of him?" Wang Qinian frowned and said, "He was the former head of the 7th Bureau. He spent his entire life in prison. When it was time for him to be released, he would rather come back and continue to be a jailer. He said he liked the smell of blood here. Tell me, how could I not be afraid of such a person?" Fan Xian shivered and thought to himself that the Overwatch Council was indeed a nest of freaks. Back then, his mother had paid for such a monstrous organization. He really didn't know what she was thinking. Following their previous directions, the two of them easily found the cell where Sea Lily was being held. Looking at the beautiful woman behind the bars, Fan Xian frowned. A weak woman locked up in such a frightening place, yet her sitting posture and expression remained calm. It seemed that she had been trained in Northern Qi. But then he immediately thought that Sea Lily was not a truly powerful figure. Otherwise she would not have fled the capital at the beginning. Instead, she would have walked right into the trap and carelessly attacked a few important figures, making the Qing court uneasy every day. Fan Xian did not know that his reasoning was exactly the same as that of the official who had escorted Sea Lily back to the capital. He took off the gray robe covering his head and looked at Sea Lily. "Miss Lily," he said gently. Sea Lily had long known that someone was coming. She had just arrived in the capital today, and someone had already come to interrogate her. It seemed that she was very important, so she deliberately put on an indifferent expression. But she had not expected it to be Master Fan. Master Fan. Sea Lily was astonished, but she forced herself not to cry out. "Miss C, it has been over a month since we parted at the Drunken Immortal Tavern. I did not expect to see you again under such circumstances." Thinking back to when they had shared the same bed, their fingers full of sweetness and tongues entwined, he had never imagined that this woman was a spy from Northern Qi. Sea Lily seemed to have thought of something, and her face darkened. "I did not expect Master Fan to be so unfathomable." Fan Xian sighed faintly. "The thin jade rustles at the head of the river, the wind is clear and the dew at night is autumn. The immortal steed stands by the side, all first-rate in the world. I had thought that even if you and I had only coincidentally met on a reverse journey, it could still be considered fate. I really do not understand why you would have the heart to do such a cruel thing to me." This poem had been written by Chen Weiyan in his previous life. To Zhu Sai, it was about being virtuous and free from vulgarity. Fan Xian thought that since Sea Lily was famous in the capital, and had always been known as a talented woman, and had always lived under the loving gazes of the people, she should have been virtuous and virtuous in her bones. At this moment he deliberately sighed in order to weaken this female spy's will. Unexpectedly, Sea Lily slowly lowered her head as if she had not been touched. Fan Xian sighed again. "You are a beautiful woman, yet you have become a thief." Sea Lily smiled sweetly. She was indeed as beautiful as orchids. "For you to enter this prison to see me, I presume your identity is not simple. We all serve our masters, so what need is there to say?" Fan Xian had finished sighing with his deadly poem, but it had been of no use. He smiled bitterly, thinking that not every woman could be so easily intoxicated by such a scene. He had been a little too absurd. He steadied his mind, and a small medicine bottle appeared in his hand. He threw the bottle in and said coldly, "This is poison. Someone will come to extort a confession. If you don't want to suffer, swallow it yourself." The small medicine bottle rolled on the hay and stopped next to Sea Lily. Sea Lily picked up the small porcelain bottle and held it tightly. She had never imagined that the gentle and amiable Fan Xian would, in the blink of an eye, become a demon tempting her to die. If she had wanted to die, she would not have fled the capital in the first place. Fan Xian had calculated this. He looked into her eyes and said softly, "Since you want to kill me, should I still cherish you? Your thinking is too absurd and laughable. Since I have pointed out a path for you to suffer less, why don't you thank me? How can someone so afraid of death be worthy of being a spy?" Sea Lily gritted her teeth in anger. She raised her head, full of hatred. Her deep eyes pierced through her slightly messy hair and stared at Fan Xian's face. Fan Xian's face was calm. "There's no need to talk about risking one's life. Actually, you are not stupid. You know that even if you confess to the high-ranking officials of the court who colluded with Northern Qi, you will still die in the end, so you might as well grit your teeth and not say anything." Sea Lily suddenly felt that Fan Xian's voice was getting further and further away, softer and softer, but also more and more terrifying. "I am not a person of the court. I simply want to find that person and get my revenge. I am willing to make a deal with you. Other than believing me, you have no other choice," Fan Xian said lightly. Fan Xian said lightly, but his tone was incomparably sinister. His voice grew lower and lower as if he was talking to himself. "I am a person who does not mind using torture on women because you wanted to kill me first. At the same time, I am a feminist. I believe that in a battle of life and death, men and women are equal." After all, he had been digging graves since he was a child. His elegant appearance could not completely hide the gloominess and terror that occasionally erupted from his bones. Wang Qinian silently left to get the prison head to open the door, and at the same time, to prepare the relevant instruments of torture. The screams of countless weak women rang out in the dark and gloomy prison. After a long time, Fan Xian frowned slightly and looked at Sea Lily, who had fainted on a pile of hay. He looked at her bloody fingers without a trace of emotion on his face. On the other hand, Wang Qinian, who had been silent all this time, felt a little strange. He could not believe that such an elegant and refined young master could remain so calm after witnessing such a terrifying scene of torture. He really did not know how much coldness Fan Xian hid under his gentle face. For torture to be effective, it would take at least 5 days. Wang Qinian swallowed with some difficulty and explained in a low voice, "This sea lily in front of us is clearly a novice, which is why she was able to force some information out of you. But in the end she is still someone who has been trained. Once a secret that must be kept is involved, and she cannot bear the physical pain, she will naturally faint." By the time the terrifying prison had arrived, Fan Xian had already hidden his face under his gray robe. The head jailer began to pack up the instruments of torture. As he did so, he shook his head and said, "Young sir, torture is also a form of knowledge. If you want to get the answer in just an hour, it is an insult to us professionals." Fan Xian was momentarily annoyed. He turned to the side to let the prison head leave. Watching him walk away, he said to Wang Qinian with a bitter smile, "It seems that it is better to leave this to the professionals. We will wait for news in a few days. With the defenses here, I don't think anyone has the ability to sneak in and silence us." Just as he was about to leave, Sea Lily slowly woke up. She touched the wound on her finger and screamed in pain. Her lips and hands, which usually played with strings on the pleasure boat, had been destroyed today. Her lips could only make pitiful sounds. Fan Xian paused for a moment and turned to look at her through the bars. Sea Lily bit her lower lip. Her face was pale and cold sweat had already soaked her hair. Her eyes were like those of a wounded lioness. She stared fiercely at Fan Xian's face, as if she wanted to imprint his face into her mind. Fan Xian stood silently and looked at her. Wang Qinian tactfully took the initiative to put some distance between them. "Put away the medicine I gave you just now. Next time if you really can't stand the torture, take it." Fan Xian used death to test her for the second time. His tone was very indifferent. Sea Lily could no longer hold back her tears. She looked at him with hatred in her eyes. Chapter 99. A damp smell, mixed with the stench of fresh blood, began to ferment outside the cell at the end of the corridor. A man and a woman who had been pretending to be affectionate in bed a month ago had long since switched roles. Fan Xian looked at the woman's wretched appearance and frowned slightly. At first, he thought he would be like what was written in the novels of the Ming and Qing dynasties, having a wonderful time with this woman, or perhaps like Bai Ledian taking her home. Who knew that the story would end so hastily before it had even begun? But there was nothing to lament about. Since she wanted to kill him, if he did as Fei Jie had said all those years ago and showed excessive sympathy, it would be extremely irresponsible to himself and the people around him. Meeting those two venomous gazes, Fan Xian explained gently and calmly, "I believe that for something like life, if you can control it, you should control it. That is why I gave the poison to you. You should know that your death is of no benefit to me, so there is no need to look at me with such a gaze. I still pity you, but I will not feel guilty. The heads of my 3 guards were smashed into smashed watermelons by your people. Who would feel guilty for their deaths?" He waved his hand. "Perhaps you don't believe me, but I used to hate the heavens. I thought I had been doing good all my life, but in the end, I received the most wretched ending. If hatred was of any use, I would have long ago punched millions of holes in the heavens. So I later understood that while you still have the ability to control your own body, you must be grateful that you still have a life to live." Sea Lily remained silent. She only gently raised her wounded hands, not letting them come into contact with the coarse grass. "Missy, think about it. Nothing in this world is more important than your own life," Fan Xian said calmly. Fan Xian calmly said, "You are a man of Qing, yet you work for Northern Qi. To be able to give up so much, presumably it is not for money but for revenge or something like that. I don't know if the rumors about you in Jingdo are true, but if you want to do something, you must ensure your own survival. And if you want to live at this time, you must pay a certain price." Sea Lily suddenly raised her head. Although the light in her eyes was dim, it was like the underworld fire in a grave, unwilling to be extinguished. After a long time, she gritted her teeth and said, "How can you guarantee that I will live?" Fan Xian's spirit rose. He crouched down and said, "You just arrived in Jingdo today, and I was able to come to the Celestial Prison to interrogate you. You should be able to guess my position in the Overwatch Council." Sea Lily shook her head weakly. "Do you think I'll believe you? This has nothing to do with belief." Fan Xian gently said, "This has always been a gamble. However, right now you are more passive. Between life and death you don't have a choice. Sea Lily's gaze wandered helplessly. She seemed to be moved. She turned her face and looked at Fan Xian's clean and beautiful face. For some reason she thought of that night on the pleasure boat where the two of them were entangled. An unreasonable hatred welled up in her heart. Like a madwoman, she leapt forward and spat at Fan Xian's face. Fan Xian dodged to the side, very surprised. It was clear that this woman's defenses were about to be loosened. Why did she suddenly change her expression? How could he know that whether it was in his previous life or this one, regardless of her occupation, this woman's mind was always like a needle at the bottom of the ocean, like sand in the mountains, hard to touch and hard to fathom. Fan Xian felt a little irritated. His willowy brows furrowed tightly, and his expression kept changing. No one knew what he was thinking. He thought of the general who had committed suicide last night, and then he thought of the one in Wuxia who was probably already dead. He knew that the other party had acted ruthlessly and quickly. If he wanted to catch the person who truly wanted to deal with him, it seemed that only Sea Lily's mouth could be used. If her confession came out too late, the person who contacted Sea Lily might also die or leave. It seemed that torture wouldn't be enough to break this Northern Chi spy's nerves in a short period of time. Unfortunately, what Fan Xian needed now was time. Even if it took a few days, what was there to be afraid of? It seemed that he wouldn't be able to get anything out of her. Fan Xian seemed a little disappointed. He stood up in front of the bars as if preparing to leave with Wang Qinian. Suddenly, he took a deep breath, frowned and stood in front of the cell. He looked coldly at the woman through the bars. Wang Qinian looked at him with some astonishment. Fan Xian's clear voice rang out. "Tell me who did this. I swear on the name of my ancestors in this world that I will definitely let you go." The only reply he got was a deathly silence. But Fan Xian refused to give up. His eyes, which were gradually becoming gentler, looked at Sea Lily's face, and looked at the bloody hands that she held in front of her chest. The damp air in the celestial prison smelled moldy, and the bars and time between Fan Xian and Sea Lily seemed to have grown moldy as well. After an indeterminate amount of time, Sea Lily still bit her lower lip and said nothing. It was clear that deep in her heart, there was some kind of painful struggle going on. The bottle of poison that Fan Xian had thrown to her was made of green porcelain. Now, under her hand on the hay, it lay quietly. It seemed to emit a very strange smell. After a long time, Fan Xian sighed. It seemed that he had given up. Before he left, he said one last thing to Sea Lily. "The way you raised your hands, you looked like a cute puppy." Later on, Wang Qinian had always felt that Fan Xian was somewhat neurotic. Even under those circumstances, he could still make fun of an enemy spy. Fan Xian himself did not feel this way. At the time, he had said it purely out of instinct. Of course, he did not know what effect his words would have on him immediately, or what it would bring him in the future. Hearing him say that she looked like a cute puppy, Sea Lily was slightly stunned. Contrary to everyone's expectations, the female spy burst into laughter. After laughing, her expression changed. No one knew what she was thinking, but she felt that her spirit was extremely relaxed. It was as if after laughing, all her burdens had been lifted. Her soul began to cower and hide in her body, carefully praying for survival. Her body felt like it was soaking in warm water, it was extremely comfortable, and she began to reminisce about the beauty of life. So she slowly raised her head. Her somewhat pale lips moved slightly and two words came out. "Mr. Wu." Fan Xian heard clearly that it was Mr. Wu. After a moment of shock, he turned to look at Wang Qinian. Wang Qinian nodded, indicating that he had heard of the name. Only then did Fan Xian let out a sigh of relief. A faint sense of excitement welled up in his heart. He reached into the bars and under Sea Lily's puzzled gaze, he took the small porcelain bottle of poison from the hay. "Thank you," he said to her, then turned to leave. Sea Lily seemed to understand something. Her blood-covered hands gripped the bars tightly. She cried out to his departing figure, "Don't forget, you swore in the name of your ancestors." After the heavy metal door closed, the Overwatch Council's prison returned to its usual calm and gloomy state. The prisoners here were usually sent to the underworld after only a few days, so there were not many prisoners left. At this moment, the faint sounds of sobbing could be heard from the deepest part of the tunnel. It was very clear and very sad. After a while, the head of the prison respectfully pushed a wheelchair out of the secret room. Chen Pingping was sitting in the wheelchair, resting with his eyes closed. He suddenly opened his eyes and asked, "What do you think of the commissioner I chose?" He was asking about Fan Xian, of course. The head of the prison thought for a moment. Cruel and merciless. He's only half of it. Which half? His hands may be cruel, but he's still a gentle man deep down. Qin Pingping smiled, and a look of gratification appeared on his aged face. That's good, that's good. A gentle heart and a ruthless method is better than a ruthless heart and a rotten method. At least I got the information from Sea Lily by mistake. The head of the prison asked calmly, "What should we do with Sea Lily?" Qin Pingping thought for a moment, then said lightly, "Observe for a while. If she can become one of us, then we'll give it a try. If not, then we'll naturally kill her." Don't we need to explain this to Commissioner Fan? I was prepared to hand the council over to him, but since he doesn't have the ability yet, there's no need for him to know too much. Yes, sir, the head of the prison replied. The first bureau is ready to depart. Qin Pingping coughed. At that moment, all the civil and military officials thought he was still in the palace. No one expected him to come alone to the celestial prison. His coughing finally subsided, and he motioned for the head of the prison to push him out. He closed his eyes and thought for a moment. Since Mr. Wu has already forced Fang De to his death, he must have left the capital by now. I'm afraid we won't make it in time. The head of the prison shrugged. He had been in charge of the affairs of the 7th Bureau, and he had always looked down on the efficiency of the 1st Bureau. There was no fun in investigating a case, so he wasn't too concerned about whether or not they could catch Mr. Wu. He just looked at the long corridor above his head and said with a headache, "Director, next time don't come and eavesdrop. It's very difficult to move this wheelchair up." Qin Pingping smiled. After leaving the palace today, he had come here to see the son of his old friend. He wanted to see what he looked like now, and whether or not he had the ability to take over everything he had prepared for him. As for the assassination on Yolan Street, he, like Wu Zhu, did not take it to heart. It was only a small matter. If Fan Xian had died like that, naturally there would be no need to worry. The more important aspect was to see the special qualities Fan Xian displayed in handling this matter. This was a test. Fan Xian did not know any of this and hurriedly left the prison with Wang Qinian. He learned from Wang Qinian that Mr. Wu was a famous strategist in the capital, but he always hovered between the second prince and the crown prince. He did not seem to have any clear inclinations, but according to rumors, many things in the bureaucracy were related to the terrifying shadow of this middle-aged man. Fan Xian raised his eyebrows slightly, and his good-looking face became slightly serious. He knew that the man was an old fox and would certainly want to cut off all the clues. By this time he might have already learned to live in seclusion in some mountain. The so-called strategist loved to do this sort of thing. After 7 or 8 years, when the matter had died down, he would run out and continue to throw out a bellyful of evil tricks. How can you be sure that what Sea Lily said is true? Wang Qinian asked. Fan Xian calmly replied, It's simple. If that Wu Bowen is still in the capital, then it is not him. If he has already run away, then it is him. It was a very simple judgment and perhaps the closest to the truth. There were too many things in this world that were complicated by the stupidity of human beings. Wang Qinian nervously asked, Then are we really going to let Sea Lily go? Sir, you don't have that kind of authority right now, but before. Although the people of the Overwatch Council did not respect ghosts or gods, they had great respect for the existence of their ancestors. Fan Xian did not answer him. He only thought to himself that his ancestors in this world did not seem to have much to do with him. He knew that it was not a good time for him to make an appearance, so he had Wang Qinian inform the First Bureau. Mu Tai knew who Fan Xian was and should believe what Wang Qinian said. When the two of them parted, Fan Xian discreetly nodded at a dark corner of the street, confirming the name Wu Bowen with that person. After making these arrangements, Fan Xian slowly returned to Fan Manor. He climbed over the wall and quietly lay on his bed, waiting for the news the next day. When Wang Qinian entered the Overwatch Council, he was surprised to find that his colleagues in the First Bureau were all ready to go. He couldn't help but be surprised. Mu Tai looked at him and smiled. That night, there was nothing to do in the capital. After Fan Xian returned to Fan Manor, he greeted everyone and then entered a secret room he had requested from his father. He carefully took out a small well-sealed leather pouch and poured out the small blue porcelain bottle. The bottle was made of green sand, and its opening was larger than that of ordinary porcelain, so it could contain a faint fragrance. Fan Xian had spent a lot of effort to make Sea Lily lower her guard. He took out a clay jar from the corner of the wall and opened the lid. A wave of fragrance assaulted his face, almost making him dizzy. He put the small blue porcelain bottle back into the jar and returned to his bedroom. His legs were wrapped in a thin silk quilt, and he fell asleep uneasily. The next day Wang Qinian came to report with some shame. He said that Wu Bowen had long since left the capital. He had expected this, so he was not disappointed. About 18 miles away from the capital there was a manor. In the distance, the snowy peaks of the Tsang Mountains could be seen. Even though it was early summer, the manor was still very cool. The grape trellis had already sprouted its leaves, and the scenery was pleasing to the eye. Wu Bowen, whom Fan Xian had painstakingly interrogated, was now sitting leisurely on the grape trellis. He looked at the young man in front of him and said with a hint of reproach, "You shouldn't have come." The young man in front of him was the second son of the Prime Minister, Lin Gong. He looked at Wu Bowen and said politely, "Mr. Wu is being forced to leave the capital. Naturally, I have to come and see you off." Chapter 100. Wu Bowen smiled. He believed that he had everything under control, and that everything was within his calculations. People always thought that he was swinging between the second prince and the crown prince, but they didn't know about his relationship with the Prime Minister. "It's too risky," he said reproachfully. "The Prime Minister doesn't know about our plan. If he were to find out, I'm afraid that even your father would have a hard time getting out." Lin Gong smiled sinisterly. "You should go to Mount Lao to meditate for a while. When the capital makes a fuss, the crown prince will know that he has to rely on the Lin family in order to rule the world." "That's right." Wu Bowen looked worried. Ever since the news of the young lady's marriage, the empress has become much colder. I don't know if it's because the eldest princess can no longer control the palace treasury. From the incident of the prime minister's illegitimate daughter at the beginning of the year to the marriage appointment, Wu Bowen felt that His Majesty had been trying to humiliate the prime minister, perhaps in preparation for the crown prince's future succession. As expected, the crown prince began to drift away from the prime minister's manor. So he secretly planned this plan. Not only could he kill Fan Xian and temporarily stabilize the situation in the palace treasury, but he could also make the crown prince fall into an unstable environment of rumors, forcing the Eastern Palace to re-establish a close relationship with the Prime Minister's manor. But from the beginning the Prime Minister had been strictly against this plan, but the second prince had been very enthusiastic. A young master and a strategist began to secretly manipulate these matters, using the name of the Prime Minister to move the Fang brothers, who had been hiding in the army for a long time. But Wu Bowen had never expected that Fan Xian would be able to escape such a terrifying attack, and even kill the 8th level ace, leaving behind an unerasable trace. But the situation was still under control. General Fang had been silenced. Even if the Overwatch Council found out that he was the mastermind, they wouldn't be able to trace it back to the Prime Minister. So Wu Bowen told the second prince, Lin Gong, to hurry back to the capital. Lin Gong smiled proudly. "I've been managing this manor for a long time. Even if the palace guards or the Overwatch Council came, it would be extremely difficult for them to come in and capture anyone. Furthermore, we've been so secretive. Who would know that we were here?" Wu Bowen thought for a moment, and it was indeed so. After he relaxed, the inescapable air of a famous scholar appeared again. He waved his paper fan at the grape trellis above his head and said with a smile, "This grape trellis is very elegant, but it reminds me of a joke." "What joke?" "There was an official who was henpecked. One day his face was scratched by his wife. The next day the governor asked him what was going on. The official replied awkwardly, saying that he was enjoying the shade under the grape trellis last night, but the trellis unexpectedly fell and scratched his face. The governor was furious and shouted, "This must have been done by your family's shrew. How dare you? Quickly summon the bailiffs to bring your wife here." At this moment, no one expected that the governor's wife was eavesdropping from the back of the court. In a rage, she rushed into the court and berated the governor. The governor panicked and hurriedly said to the official, "You can leave first. My house's grape trellis has also collapsed." After telling the joke, the two of them burst into laughter. The second son, Lin Gong, had naturally heard this joke before. However, he understood the meaning behind it. Was Mr. Wu implying that his father was henpecked? But his mother died early. Could it be that the Prime Minister was afraid of the eldest princess? Lin Gong was a little angry. Just then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a black shadow appear in the garden. It was a blind man with a piece of black cloth covering his eyes. In his hand was an iron drill with blood slowly dripping from its tip. Lin Gong and Wu Zhu stood up abruptly. They knew that this person had snuck in without a sound, and that all the experts outside must have died to this iron drill. Thinking of how none of the experts in the manor had even cried out before they died, Lin Gong felt a chill in his heart. He shouted in fear, "Who are you? Let's talk." Wu Zhu didn't answer him. Like a ghost, he rushed over from the other end of the garden. Lin Gong roared, unsheathed the flexible sword at his waist and swung it down. Wu Zhu leaned to the side, dodging the tip of the sword. His whole body was pressed against Lin Gong's face. The two of them were very close and it looked somewhat strange. There was a splat. Fresh blood dripped from the iron drill sticking out of Lin Gong's back. He looked at the black cloth in front of him, his eyes full of fear and disbelief. He was the son of the Prime Minister, and this person didn't even give him a chance to speak before killing him. The iron drill had already pierced through Lin Gong's chest, and then Wu Zhu's whole body was pressed against it. Lin Gong's body slid back a few inches on the iron drill. It was a terrifying sight. With a ripping sound, Wu Zhu calmly pulled the iron drill out of Lin Gong's body. He seemed to be moving very slowly, but in reality he was quickly moving 3 steps to the side, avoiding the fountain of blood spurting from Lin Gong's chest. The iron drill pierced right through Lin Gong's heart. Blood sprayed out from the small hole. It was a very beautiful sight. Seeing this bloody scene, Wu Boan's face was deathly pale, but he tightly covered his mouth, not allowing himself to make the slightest sound. He saw the black cloth covering his opponent's eyes, and knew that he was blind. He was trying to bluff his way through. Wu Zhu tilted his head slightly, turning around to look at him. Wu Boan's heart surged with intense despair, but a trace of a bitter smile appeared on his face. He tried to make his voice as steady as possible. "I am not one of the Prime Minister's men." This warrior knew that selling his life to others was not necessarily a promising thing. "I am Wu Boan, and I have a wide circle of friends in the capital. If you still have your ambitions, why not?" His voice stopped abruptly, and he looked down with difficulty at the iron drill that had already pierced through his throat. He did not understand why this assassin would not want to hear him out. He was a weak scholar, not a threat. Besides, he considered himself not only a strategist, but also a peerless orator. If this blind assassin was willing to hear him out, he would not kill him. He still had many important things to do in his life. How could he die like this? But the strategist Wu Boan had died so easily. Wu Zhu had lived in this world for more than 30 years, but he had never understood why, whether it was in Dongyi, Northern Wei, the capital, or here, every time he was about to kill someone, these people always liked to talk incessantly. The young lady had once said, "Swords are always more powerful than words." Wu Zhu had always thought he understood the meaning of these words, but he did not understand why the people of the world did not understand this principle. Wu Zhu put away the iron drill and walked out of the garden, a little lonely. After he left, the grape rack finally could no longer withstand the murderous aura of Wu Zhu's quick movements. With a crack, it fell over the 2 corpses. The green leaves covered them and the old vines were entwined together. For the next few days, there was no other news from the Overwatch Council. Mu Tai had come to Fan Manor once to flatter him, but Wu Boan, who was not famous, but was actually a very powerful strategist, had suddenly disappeared. Fan Xian did not seem to be in a good mood, so when Mu Tai's hand landed lightly on his leg, he did not leave a good impression. Count Sinan's secret agents also quietly joined the search party, but they still came up empty-handed. When Wang Qinian reported the failure of the operation, Fan Xian had no choice but to put the matter aside for the time being. He forced his thoughts to focus on his sister, the bookstore, and the chicken leg. He patiently waited for Uncle Blackcloth's next move. That afternoon he forced himself to take his sister and Xijia to King Jing's manor. Unexpectedly, King Jing was not there. Crown Prince Li Hongqing said helplessly, "Father, my son went to the palace today. He said the Empress Dowager missed him." Fan Xian laughed and did not think too much about the matter. He and Li Hongqing went to the back garden under the pergola, eating some fruits and chatting to avoid the heat of early summer. None of them were outsiders, so the prince's youngest daughter, Princess Wuxia, who Fan Xian had once been very interested in, was also there and did not avoid anything. Fan Xian looked at the girl and could not help but feel a lingering fear. When he had heard Ruoro talk about the story of the stone, he had wondered if the princess would develop some sort of affection for him after finding out that he was the author of the story of the stone. But after seeing Wuxia, Fan Xian immediately dismissed that thought. The princess was very beautiful. Her little face was rosy, and she was also very gentle and polite. In fact, she was the most gentle woman Fan Xian had ever seen since he came to this world. But Fan Xian still resolutely turned his nose to the sky, and did not look at her in the slightest. This was because this princess had just turned 12 this year, and was an incomparably pure and unripe fruit. She could not even be considered a young girl. Fan Xian was a man of many emotions, but he was not a promiscuous person. Whenever he thought of doing something with a 12-year-old girl, he felt a pang of fear and tried to avoid it. Who would have thought that his worst fears would come true? Princess Ruojia had been sitting obediently by Ruoruo's side the entire time. Her eyes, intentionally or unintentionally, had been glancing at Fan Xian. Her large eyes flashed shyly, and Fan Xian's heart raced, flustered, confused and afraid. Fan Xizha was led away by the servants of the manor to shoot arrows. Fan Xian and the crown prince were chatting casually, and the two girls were also quietly talking about something. Just as Fan Xian was feeling awkward, he suddenly saw one of the manor's subordinates rush in and whisper something into Li Hongqing's ear. Li Hongqing's expression changed, and he looked at Fan Xian with a puzzled expression. What's happened? Fan Xian looked at the awning and smiled. The prince's grape trellises are very well built, but it reminds me of a joke. The crown prince did not give him a chance to show off his little talent in front of the girls. With a serious expression, he pulled him aside and quietly said, "Something has happened." Chapter 101. What is it? Fan Xian knew that it was not a simple matter, otherwise Li Hongqing would not be so nervous. But he still forced a smile. As long as your grape trellis is intact. Strangely enough, Li Hongqing had long since reached marriageable age, but for some reason he had never taken a wife. I don't have time to joke with you. Li Hongqing's face darkened. Yesterday there was a murder in a manor at the foot of the Tsang Mountains. Wu Bo-in and the second son of the Prime Minister Lin Gong were both killed. Fan Xian turned pale with fright. What? Li Hongqing said, yes, your future brother-in-law is dead. Fan Xian had not thought about the complicated relationship between relatives. He was a little shocked. Wu Bo-in's death was within his expectations, but if it was not his uncle who did it and someone was trying to silence him, how could the second son of the Prime Minister be involved? Fan Xian was aware of this. His net worth was still far below that of his second brother-in-law. Since Wu Bo-in and his future brother-in-law had died together, could it be that the person who wanted to kill him was the Prime Minister's father-in-law? He had no feelings for this brother-in-law he had never met, but thinking about what had happened, he could not help but feel a little distressed. After calming down a little, he asked, how did they die? Li Hongqing described the scene of the discovery to him. Given the remoteness of the manor, it would have taken a long time for the murder to be discovered. He hadn't expected that the third day would coincide with the announcement of the mountain order. As soon as he entered the manor, he saw the corpses strewn all over the ground. In his shock he reported it to the higher-ups. Because the dead were the Prime Minister's son and Wu Bo-in, who had a special status, the news passed through the capital government and the Ministry of Justice directly to the palace. King Jing entered the palace that day and heard the news, so he asked a eunuch he was familiar with to send word back. Fan Xian's heart skipped a beat. King Jing must have known that he would be visiting the manor today, so he took the risk to send word back. It seemed that he wanted to inform Fan Xian. But why did he think Fan Xian needed this information? Seeing his expression, Li Hongqing lowered his voice and said, the Overwatch Council is looking for Wu Bo-in. I heard it had something to do with the assassination attempt on you last time. His death was so strange this time. Be careful not to arouse suspicion. Fan Xian pretended to be shocked and waved his hands. This has nothing to do with me. Even the Overwatch Council can't find him. How can I find him? If the Prime Minister really believes this, how can I live in the capital? Li Hongqing saw that he did not seem to be faking it. He breathed a sigh of relief. If you really did it, I will have to reevaluate your power. I will have to please you in the future. By now, Fan Xian was quite familiar with him. He laughed and scolded, what kind of shameful statement is that? I only hope that the Prime Minister will not link his son's death to me, or I will have to thank the gods. Li Hongqing said, I don't think so. Your explanation just now was very convincing. If Sir Chen couldn't catch someone, then it's even more impossible for you to catch him when you've just entered the capital. Even if you did catch him, you wouldn't just kill him to vent your anger. He looked at Fan Xian and said seriously, I believe you. I will speak to my father on your behalf. I believe that the Prime Minister will not act rashly. Fan Xian sighed. I'm afraid that the Prime Minister will first have to find a way to explain why the second young master was with Wu Bo-in. You should know that Wu Bo-in is connected to spies from northern Qi. His crime of treason is already established. Li Hongqing nodded and said worriedly, "It's just that the Prime Minister has lost his son in his old age. If his political enemies use Wu Bo An's matter to attack him, I'm afraid his days will not be easy." Fan Xian stole a glance at the Crown Prince. "Aren't you and the second prince the Prime Minister's political enemies? Why do you have to make it sound so indifferent?" After leaving King Jing's manor and getting into the carriage, Fan Ruoruo noticed that her brother's expression was not right. She asked with concern, "Are you not feeling well? Or did you get sunburned too much earlier?" Fan Xizha joined in and sat down, fawningly handing Fan Xian his folding fan. Fan Xian was a little uneasy, so he was a little irritated. He said impatiently, "I'm fine." After saying it, he realized that there was something wrong with his tone. He smiled bitterly and explained, "There are some troublesome matters that I need to think about. Don't worry about me for now." After entering Fan Manor, the first thing Fan Xian did was run to his father's study. He found that his father was not at home. Perhaps he had been summoned to the palace. Somewhat uneasy, he returned to his room. When he sat down at the table, he realized that his back was drenched in sweat. In fact, when Li Hongqing described the deaths of Wu Boan and the Prime Minister's second son, Fan Xian already knew who had done it. In this world, no one was more familiar with Wu Zhu's methods and the traces he left behind. That night, when Fan Xian found out the name Wu Boan in the imperial prison, he knew that Wu Boan was already a dead man, but he did not expect that Lin Wan'er's second brother would also die. Although he did not know how Wu Zhu had found Mr. Wu, given Wu Zhu's cold and indifferent personality, it was quite normal for him to kill two people behind the scenes who had plotted against Fan Xian. Wu Zhu was a grandmaster. In his eyes, perhaps the son of the Prime Minister was just like the assassin who had come to kill him in Danzhou, flesh and blood. As long as it did not implicate Fan Xian, Wu Zhu's iron rod was not a taboo. Fan Xian was uneasy. If even King Jing believed that he had something to do with Lin Gong's death, what would the Prime Minister think? He wanted to avenge the death of his bodyguard and the serious injuries he and Ting Zijing had suffered. He had also thought that the mastermind behind the scenes might be the Prime Minister, his future father-in-law. If that was the case, Fan Xian thought that he would kill Wu Boan as a warning. But he did not expect that Lin Wan'er's second brother would die so cleanly. The Lin family only had two sons, and he heard that the eldest had some problems. Thinking of Lin Wan'er gave Fan Xian another headache. Even if Wan'er had grown up in the palace and had no feelings for the Lin family, they were still related by blood. This was a fact that could not be denied. He stood up and walked around the table twice. His eyes gradually became determined. He decided that for the rest of his life he would never let Wan'er know about this. He could not let her know that it was his uncle who killed her brother. In the depths of the incomparably dignified palace, the room of the most powerful man in the world was far less imposing than the territory he governed. The incense in the cauldron gradually dispersed, leaving behind only a thick layer of incense ash. Outside the door, the sun shone in from the west, and the willows that came rushing over the threshold could be counted in the light. The room was paved with light-colored bricks, and on its left and right stood a dozen or so high-ranking officials of the court. Today was not a formal court meeting, so this was not Taiji Palace but a side hall. The great emperor of Qing did not sit on the high dragon throne, but chose a chair at random to sit on. Today the emperor wore a water blue silk casual robe, with a golden ribbon with a coiled dragon tied around his waist. His jet black hair was tied up tightly, and only a few strands of silver could be seen at his temples. He sat casually on the chair, lower than the officials standing around him, but his aura made him seem like he was sitting at the highest point of the world, looking down on the millions of subjects beneath his feet. Today the affairs of the state had come to an end. Only a few old and important officials remained in the room. Qin Pingping sat first on the left. Because he was in a wheelchair he looked very special. His head drooped listlessly as if he was about to fall asleep. These officials knew that as the emperor's most trusted aide, Director Qin, he had received an edict that he did not need to attend the regular court meetings. But today's meeting was something he had to attend. Prime Minister Lin Ruofu sat first on the right. Today he also had special treatment. He sat on a round stool, but his official robe was a bit long, so he looked a bit comical. This world-famous treacherous man was born with delicate features and his eyes were bright and full of expression. Only his slightly white beard revealed his true age. It could be assumed that when he was young he must have been a handsome man. Today his eyes were a bit red and swollen and his lips were a bit white. Presumably he had been crying earlier. "My condolences, Prime Minister. the emperor said softly. The room buzzed with echoes. You should rest in the manor for a few days. It's also good to send that child off. Lin Ruofu stood up and bowed respectfully. Choking with sobs, he said, I dare not. It is already a sin to disturb your majesty regarding my son's matter. The other officials also warmly tried to persuade the old prime minister. The dead could not be brought back to life and so on and so on. Lin Ruofu suddenly said in a loud voice, Dare I ask your majesty to uphold justice for me, and seek justice for that dead child. Having said this, he knelt down. That afternoon he had learned of his second son's death. The prime minister, who had always had a heart of stone, almost fainted. As the saying goes, the old send off the young. How could he withstand such an emotional blow? The emperor's lips curled up without anyone noticing. But no one dared to stare at the emperor's face, so no one noticed this small detail. His Majesty seemed to be a bit surprised by the Prime Minister's words. Since the attack on Fan Xian's son 2 days ago, another murder has unexpectedly occurred in the capital. Naturally, the capital government cannot escape responsibility. Do not worry, Prime Minister. I will punish them heavily to give you an explanation. Each department must seize the opportunity to apprehend the culprit, with the Ministry of Justice taking the lead. If there is any disagreement, Director Chen will take command. Chen Pingping seemed to be sleeping soundly, but now he opened his eyes and smiled. Lin Ruofu's eyes shone brightly, but it only lasted for a moment. He kowtowed to the emperor, and under the persuasion of the others, stood up. The emperor looked at him calmly. The kingdom of Qing did not pay much attention to etiquette, and the emperor knew that the prime minister's head was not easy to bear. He suddenly frowned and said, In the previous incident, there was the shadow of northern Qi. They intended to cause a disturbance in the royal court. Could it be that this time it is another foreign thief? Has the forbidden land fallen to such a state? Send down an edict. Have the 3 departments in the north conduct a thorough investigation. He suddenly reprimanded him sternly. Chen Pingping, you need to put some effort into the affairs of the council. Do you think the 4th Bureau does nothing? This time you went back to visit your relatives and it dragged on for an extra month. Do you want the children of the officials in the court to die before you are willing to come back? The emperor's anger silenced the entire hall. Chapter 102. Hearing His Majesty's voice grow louder and louder, the officials were alarmed. It was rare to see His Majesty so angry, and even rarer to reprimand Chen Pingping. Chen Pingping's expression did not change. On my way back to the capital, someone in the court tried to kidnap the spy from northern Qi, Si Lily. Si Lily is related to the assassination attempt on the son of the Fan family. This is a serious matter, and after receiving the report, I took a detour to escort the spy back. That's why I was delayed for some time. So that's how it is. That's all. The emperor softly grunted. He had raised the matter high and then lightly let it fall. The ministers were initially shocked, thinking that His Majesty didn't seem to like even Qin Daran very much. Then they realized that the matter of returning late was, in the end, improper, and His Majesty was using this matter to settle this debt. But then they remembered what Chen Pingping had said about Si Lily. This was the first time the officials had heard of someone trying to break a prisoner out, and they couldn't help but be shocked. They wondered if there really was a high-ranking official colluding with Northern Qi to confuse the court. Put the matter of Si Lily aside for now. First, investigate the case of the son of the Prime Minister. The emperor looked at Chen Pingping coldly. Chen Pingping straightened in his wheelchair and looked at Lin Ruofu again. He smiled. These 2 cases are actually one. What do you mean? Not only the emperor but the other officials were also interested. Only Lin Ruofu seemed to have thought of something, and his expression became very unsightly. The Prime Minister was worried about the death of his son. There are some things I shouldn't say, but as an official, I dare not hide anything from His Majesty. Please forgive me for speaking out of turn. The emperor frowned. Let's hear it. Chen Pingping clenched his withered hand into a fist and covered his mouth with blue veins. He coughed a few times as if coughing up all the phlegm in his chest. When the second son of the Prime Minister, Lin Gong, was killed, he was with Wu Boan. Who is this Wu Boan? The emperor frowned. Speak clearly. Most of the officials in the room knew of Wu Boan's reputation in the capital's officialdom. However, they had always thought that this strategist was swinging between the crown prince and the second prince. Who would have thought that he was with the son of the Prime Minister? Now that they looked at the Prime Minister again, they couldn't help but feel a little worried. After all, they were all civil servants. If Wu Bowen was bitten by the mad dog Wu Bowen, they would all lose face. At this time Lin Ruofu was sitting on a round stool. His eyes were still red and swollen, but he didn't seem to be worried. A few days ago, I investigated the assassination attempt on Fan Xian's son. Si Lily confessed that the person who contacted Northern Qi was Wu Bowen, and that the person who let the Western barbarian archers into the capital was General Fang Darren of the city patrol. The leader of the cavalry outside Sangzhou who attempted to break out the prisoners was a subordinate of Fang Darren's distant cousin, General Xiao of Wuzhou. Now, it seems that the mastermind of this incident was Wu Bowen. Fang Xiao and Fang Darren were both executors, responsible for receiving the Northern Qi assassins and silencing them. As for the matter of the archers' bodies being cremated first, there are currently no clues. What are you trying to say? I don't mean anything else. I'm just curious as to why the second young master of Lin Ruofu would be in the manor at the foot of Tsang Mountain with the mastermind behind the assassination attempt on Fan Xian's son. Hearing this, the officials were in an uproar. Guiyu, the Minister of Rights, was the first to defend the Prime Minister. Let's not talk about whether Si Lily could not stand the torture and made a wild accusation. Even if Wu Bo and had something to do with the previous case. He turned to the emperor and apologized. Your Majesty, please don't blame me. It was because Wu Bo and was a scholar 20 years ago. He was famous in the capital and had a wide circle of friends. It was normal for the second young master of Lin Ruofu to be in the same place as him. How could you slander the deceased because of this? The Prime Minister's pain of losing his son has not yet subsided, and yet Qin Fan is spouting such nonsense. It is really unbearable. Unbearable. Lin Ruofu stood up and bowed to the emperor. My son was unfilial, he said in a pained voice. He acted rashly and met with misfortune. But if you say he had such a disloyal heart, I absolutely do not believe it. He continued, I have also met Wu Bowen. He is indeed a talented man. I have also traveled with him to the famous sites around the capital. If he was acquainted with Wu Bo, then it would be related to the murder case. Wouldn't I be unable to escape the suspicion? Correct. An official also shook his head. I have also met Wu Bowen. Looking at his face, he seems quite upright. If he really is a cruel and unscrupulous person, then what does it have to do with the second young master of Lin Ruofu? You should be careful with what you say. Lin Ruofu's face was filled with emotion. If I have anything to do with this matter, then the heavens will hate me, the heavens will hate me. Hearing the Prime Minister's heavy words, the officials knelt down with him. Seeing the officials kneeling, the emperor rested his chin on his hand and glanced at Qin Pingping. His eyes were full of smiles. In the blink of an eye, the emperor's face turned frosty. He motioned for the officials to rise and sternly said, Qin Pingping has already apologized. He has not finished yet. Allow him to continue. It was always like this in the court. Qin Pingping dominated the court, and the civil officials always liked to group together. Qin Pingping glanced at Lin Ruofu and said, Prime Minister, please calm your anger. I just feel puzzled. The Overwatch Council searched the capital for a day and a night, but they still could not find Wu Bowen. Yet the young master was able to drink and chat with this strategist under the grape trellis. Naturally, I want to understand. Whether or not Wu Bowen was the mastermind behind the previous case is still unknown. Perhaps he and the second young master of Lin Ruofu had arranged to go to the Tsang Mountains to enjoy the scenery. Qin Pingping, we will discuss this matter later. The emperor suddenly spoke coldly, stopping Qin Pingping's statement. Seeing that the emperor was on their side, the officials let out a sigh of relief. But Lin Ruofu's heart was struck by the words, discuss later. A wave of coldness welled up in his heart. He knew that the emperor was warning him not to make a fuss. This was a kind of exchange, one that did not require the aid of words, but was understood by both sides. Lin Ruofu trusted Yuan Hongdao's judgment. Gong Er's death had nothing to do with the Fan family, so he remained silent and accepted the truth. After all, if the Overwatch Council pursued the matter of Wu Bowen's collusion with Northern Qi, it would be considered treason, and he feared that he would lose his position as Prime Minister. Earlier you said that these two cases were one. What do you mean by that? Qin Pingping looked at the officials with an expressionless face. The officials were afraid of the cold look in his eyes and coughed uncomfortably. He said quietly, after the Ministry of Justice and the Council examined the wounds of the deceased and the scene at the time, they determined that the culprit was Sigu Jian from Dongyi City. Therefore I concluded that the two cases were one. Hearing the words Sigu Jian, Even the officials who did not know martial arts were moved. It was no wonder that when they recounted the attack on the Tsang Mountain Manor, they heard that there was only one culprit, yet he was able to silently kill a dozen masters and each one was fatal. Only Lin Ruofu's expression did not change, as if he had known about this a long time ago. The emperor furrowed his brows. Although he did not care about the four great grandmasters, these transcendent martial arts experts were an existence that was difficult for the dignity of the imperial court to tolerate. Because a few days ago, among the assassins killed by the Fan clan's son, there were 2 female assassins. According to the council's records, these 2 female assassins should have been under the tutelage of Sigu Jian from Dongyi City, but we do not know if they were his disciples or grand-disciples. A month ago, there were reports from the council that Sigu Jian was not in Dongyi City. In my opinion, the sword fanatic should have come to Qing. The emperor slowly closed his eyes and asked coldly, why did he not kill the Fan clan's children but instead find Wu Boan? Everyone knows that Sigu Jian is a sword fanatic. When his disciples assassinated someone else and were killed in retaliation, he would probably admire the other party's methods and would not view them as enemies. Furthermore, this person loathed schemes and plots and strictly forbade his disciples from involving themselves in the struggles of the country. If Wu Boan had not promised some benefits and persuaded the 2 female assassins, they would not have died. I'm afraid that in his heart, only Wu Boan is his true enemy. Qin Pingping spoke lightly. He lied without batting an eyelid. After a long time, the emperor's dignified voice rang out in the palace. The capital's magistrate, Mei Zhili, pleads guilty. His salary will be reduced for a year. The Overwatch Council will be stationed in the City Patrol Division to investigate, and Jiao Ziheng will be relieved of his duties. The Ministry of Justice will continue to investigate 2 additional murder cases. After the cases are concluded, an edict will be issued to Dongyi City to hand over the culprit. Having said this, he went up to Lin Ruofu and said a few words of comfort, then left the room. The officials retreated, and a serving girl came forward to push Qin Pingping's wheelchair into the inner palace. The officials were not surprised by this. They had never imagined that they would one day receive such favor from Qin Pingping. That was why they were so tightly united in all matters, big or small. Fighting against the power of the Overwatch Council was the same as fighting against the emperor's personal power. This was the traditional concept of the civil officials since the founding of the Qing kingdom. It seemed to have been deeply ingrained in their heads and could never be shaken off. The officials even thought maliciously that perhaps it was because Qin Pingping was paralyzed and had no children that the emperor trusted him so unreservedly. In the quiet depths of the palace, there were no eunuchs or serving girls. Only the emperor and Qin Pingping sat facing each other. The emperor raised his teacup and took a sip. He seemed to feel that the temperature of the tea was not quite right. He frowned and smashed the cup in front of Qin Pingping's wheelchair. Crack. The porcelain cup shattered into pieces, and the tea soaked the bottom of Qin Pingping's trousers. His legs were not good and he could not avoid it. Different from before, the emperor's voice was particularly cold and oppressive. Sigu Jian? This answer is a bit preposterous. It was as if Qin Pingping did not see the scene in front of him. With a face full of smiles, he replied respectfully, I dare not hide this from you, your majesty. That wound was mournful and had a sense of loss. The Ministry of Justice and the Council all agreed on this. The emperor curled the corners of his lips and looked at him with a smile. Suddenly, a strange light flashed through his eyes. He asked in a loud voice, Is Lao Wu in the capital? Qin Pingping slowly raised his head and opened his lips. A moment later he said, Correct. Sir Wu is currently in Jingdo. The emperor seemed a bit tired. He rubbed the space between his brows and lightly said, Just how many things are you hiding from me? He then sighed and said, Never mind. Since you even dare to hide the couplet, then you must hide it from the people under heaven. Don't let those people know of Lao Wu's existence. Chapter 103. Yes, sir, Qin Pingping answered respectfully. Were those 2 female assassins really Sigu Jian's disciples? Yes. The emperor suddenly furrowed his brows and asked, Would Sigu Jian really not kill the Fan family's son for revenge? Qin Pingping answered respectfully, A grandmaster will always have some heirs. He is still training in the Dongyi sword pit. As long as Fan Xian does not go to Dongyi, it will be fine. I am also handling this matter. I know. We didn't finish talking about it the night before yesterday. We will continue today. The emperor half closed his eyes to rest. It took you so long to return to the capital. Even if you are not afraid of the censor's complaints, I still have to consider the opinions of the people. I know you are throwing a tantrum and are not satisfied with the arrangements you have made for him. Qin Pingping gently rubbed the fingernail of his right hand's ring finger. It was unclear whether he was nervous or excited, but his wrinkled face remained calm. After this matter, I reckon the Prime Minister will bear a grudge. Although he will believe that it was Sigurjian who did it, he will always believe that his son died because of Lady Fan. This marriage, I think we should forget about it. The Emperor calmly said, it doesn't matter. King Jing has already entered the palace. For some reason he likes that kid very much. Don't be fooled by his indifference. If he really wants to protect someone, no one in the court would dare to touch him. As for Lin Ruofu, he is a smart man. After Lin Gong's death, who should he trust? 20 years later, he should make a truly smart decision. King Jing? Qin Pingping was a little surprised. Of course, he did not recognize him, so I do not know where his affection for that kid came from. The Emperor sighed. Perhaps it is all fate. It seemed that these words touched on some old pain. The Emperor and the official fell silent at the same time. Qin Pingping suddenly said, I opposed this marriage 4 years ago. Today I still oppose this marriage. The Emperor opened his eyes and looked at him. You are younger than me, but you have worked hard all these years and have aged a lot. In the future you should worry less about these things. The matters of these little fellows are not qualified for you to worry about them. Qin Pingping smiled. When this is over, I will retire. What is it? Your Majesty, about that child. The Emperor's tone became indifferent. In order to leave his mother's things to him, I went through many twists and turns. I pretended to feel sorry for Chen made her a princess and used this property as her dowry. Then I asked the Empress Dowager to appoint a marriage. Only then did I give him these things. I have put in a lot of effort. Could it be that you are still dissatisfied? I wouldn't dare. Qin Pingping knew that in order for Fan Xian to be able to regain control of the Yi family, the Emperor had used many methods. He said seriously, however, I have always wondered how the Overwatch Council would be dealt with if one day I passed away. If the council was handed over to an outsider, it would be a very dangerous matter. Unlike the succession of imperial power, the Overwatch Council was a somewhat abnormal existence. It was completely dependent on the Emperor's unparalleled trust in Qin Pingping and Qin Pingping's unparalleled loyalty to the Emperor. If Qin Pingping died, no matter who took over the Overwatch Council, it could have an unimaginably terrifying effect on the Qin court. If it was handed over to an official, there could be a powerful official who could threaten the royal family. If it was handed over to a prince, there could be an overly powerful prince who could affect the succession of the throne. The Emperor closed his eyes again as if thinking about something. You think I should hand the council over to him? Correct. Since that child is not an outsider, he will not threaten the palace. But his background means that he cannot participate in the struggle of the Emperor's family, so he can maintain a neutral position, Qin Pingping replied slowly. The Emperor seemed to be moved. Let me think about it. Take good care of your body. You still have 10 or 20 years to live. There is no need to rush this matter. Yes. Qin Pingping saw that today's goal had been achieved. He respectfully bowed and retreated. A palace maid saw him from afar and came to help him walk out of the palace. The Emperor stood up and closed his eyes for a long time. Suddenly, he opened his eyes and watched the wheelchair walk out of the palace. He had never doubted Qin Pingping's loyalty to him, but he had always wondered why this old dog was so obsessed with that woman. He was willing to do anything to fight for all the power he could get for that child. Thinking of that child, a trace of gentleness suddenly flashed across the face of this world's ruler. He thought to himself, I haven't seen him since coming to the capital. The palace maid pushed the wheelchair into the inner palace. A guard took it and slowly pushed it into the outer palace. When it reached the palace gates, people from the Overwatch Council took it and helped old Sir Chen into the carriage. The carriage moved forward on Zhuke Avenue, rolling over the stone pavement and making a rhythmic sound. It had been a long time, but they still hadn't left the inner city. The road to the east of the city was very quiet. At this time the sky was half dark. The carriage turned diagonally and stopped in a secluded place. There, another carriage was already waiting. The officials from the Overwatch Council and the guards next to the carriage didn't seem to be familiar with each other, but they tacitly left the carriage at the same time and scattered around, forming a relatively hidden defensive circle. The two carriages were very close to each other. At the same time, the people in the carriage opened the side curtain and looked at each other. It was Qin Pingping and Fan Xian's father, Fan Jian, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. Qin Pingping looked at this righteous face and was very angry. While I was not in the capital, you coaxed His Majesty into finding a good marriage for your son. Fan Jian saw that he was angry, but he was neither afraid nor nervous. He smiled and replied, "For years ago you ruined my plans. I'm just trying to make things right." Qin Pingping coldly said, "What's there to be happy about with such a pile of stinking money?" Fan Jian shook his head. "Money is the most important thing. Don't forget that when the council was first built, if it weren't for Xiener's mother, you would be starving. The palace treasury of today is no longer the Yi family of the past. If the Fan family were to take over, I'm afraid they would be badly battered. His Majesty forced the Lin family to acknowledge an illegitimate daughter so that you and the Prime Minister could live in peace. At the same time, it was also for the future. Otherwise, if people found out that a princess was married to a prince, what would they say?" Qin Pingping laughed coldly. "Listen to my advice. Annul this marriage. Will be a good thing for both of you." "You think I don't know what you're planning?" Fan Jian frowned. "You've always believed that the eldest princess had something to do with what happened back then. But after all these years you still haven't found any evidence." "That's not the only reason." Qin Pingping's face was cold. "Even if His Majesty feels that he owes him, think about it. If His Majesty really did listen to you and return the Yi family to him, what would happen to the council? His Majesty is a great strategist. He would never allow anyone in the world to wield these two national weapons at the same time. Not even him." Fan Jian's frown deepened. "If you know all this, then why did you involve my son in this matter? Wouldn't it be better for him to be a rich man? Is it that easy to be a rich man? With you and me in the capital, and the eldest princess having been taught a lesson, the next few years should be very peaceful." Qin Pingping's voice was cold. "Don't forget your son was almost killed a month ago." Fan Jian stared into his eyes. "That was my negligence, but it was also your fault. If you hadn't been so angry and refused to return, then there wouldn't have been so much trouble in the capital." Qin Pingping calmly said, "If your son had died just like that, would you and I still need to put in so much effort?" After a moment of silence, Fan Jian spoke. "In this matter I have paid a far greater price than you. So if you can't make a choice, I hope you will respect my opinion." Qin Pingping thought for a moment, then agreed with what Fan Jian had said. Fan Jian coldly let down the curtain and gave the order. The two carriages went their separate ways. Darkness enveloped the imperial city. In this ink-like background, some people gathered for the sake of benefits and some gathered for the sake of ideals. Then they would often separate because of the same two words, waiting for some day or some coincidental reason to come together again. At the foot of the royal city, next to the tall red walls of the palace, a sedan chair walked slowly. Behind it followed a few attendants. The imperial guards at the palace gates saw the sedan chair walk around the palace walls, but no one came forward to question it. It was the Prime Minister's sedan chair. This was the Prime Minister's habit. Whenever the kingdom of Qing encountered a problem, he would always have his sedan chair carried around the palace walls. Some people said that he pondered in a strict and quiet environment. Those who despised the Prime Minister believed that this strange habit of his showed some kind of sick fanaticism for power. In the second year of the Qing calendar, there was a flood in the southern river. The Prime Minister sat in his sedan chair and circled the palace walls many times. The next day he presented a memorial detailing the division of labor and procedures for disaster relief. It was clear and powerful, but the most crucial aspect of money was money. The Ministry of Revenue found it difficult to make ends meet. At this time, the palace treasury received a large sum of money from overseas trade, which provided protection for the Prime Minister's plans. His Majesty was very pleased. People often said that the Prime Minister was a treacherous man. One could tell just by looking at his manner. The Prime Minister was a capable man. One could tell just by looking at the world. But regardless of whether he was a treacherous man or a capable man, at certain times, he would always return to his most primal role, such as being a father. Today the Prime Minister's sedan chair circled the palace walls. No one dared to disturb him because everyone knew that his second son had died and he was in a bad mood. The night gradually deepened. Red candles and lanterns were lit in the palace. A faint yellow light spilled over the high walls, but this side of the palace walls was still pitch black. The sedan chair slowly walked to a secluded corner of the palace walls. In the distance, a lantern swayed as it approached. As it got closer, it became clear that it was also a sedan chair. Chapter 104. The two palanquins stopped at the same time. The bearers carefully put down their poles, and just like when Fan Xian and Chen Pingping met, they quietly retreated into the distance. The palanquins naturally leaned forward so the people sitting inside should be uncomfortable. But strangely, neither the Prime Minister nor the person in the palanquin came out to greet them. So the palanquins bowed to each other like two friends greeting each other, or like a couple bowing to heaven and earth before their wedding night. Ruofu, don't be too sad. A soft and weak voice finally came from the opposite palanquin. It was the eldest princess coming out of the palace to see her lover from many years ago. Hearing this familiar voice, the Prime Minister frowned slightly, as if remembering something from many years ago. He said lightly, "I am very grateful that the eldest princess is concerned about my family matters." Hearing his distant words, the eldest princess's voice immediately became mournful. "This difference between master and subject, how can it be brought up between the two of us? Why are you speaking so coldly today?" A cold laugh came from the Prime Minister's palanquin. "Your Highness, Ruofu is incompetent, but I do not want to become a dough that you can knead as you wish." The other palanquin fell silent as if not expecting such hurtful words. After a long while she replied pitifully, "Ruofu, what do you mean? Although Gong is not my child, I always send people to send gifts to your residence during the festival. I love him as much as you do. As a dignified princess, am I your punching bag? Forget it, you are not in a good mood today, so let's not talk about it." Lin Ruofu suddenly snorted. "I have met with the eldest princess today to tell you that I have agreed to Chinner's marriage in October." It was completely dark outside the palace walls. Only the lantern placed next to the eldest princess' sedan gave off a bit of light. The long period of silence was enough to prove how shocked the seemingly weak woman in the sedan was right now, and how angry she was after hearing these words. After a long time, the eldest princess' clear voice that was like the cold winds of winter came through the sedan curtains. "That is my daughter. I will not let her marry that little bastard of the Fan family." Whether in or out of the palace, the eldest princess had always given people an image of weakness. Who knew that her words would be so harsh? "Can you persuade His Majesty?" Lin Ruofu's voice carried a trace of self-blame and self-pity. "Moreover, Your Majesty has let the world know that Chinner is my daughter. This means that she is destined to be a dishonorable character." The eldest princess's voice immediately became extremely sad and beautiful. "You really have the heart too." Hearing her voice now, Lin Ruofu felt disgusted. He said with disgust, "If Princess is worried about the palace treasury, that is no longer within the scope of my consideration." Chang Gongfang said in a trembling voice, "If you don't consider it, who will? I am just a woman, living alone in the palace. Do you think it was easy for me all these years?" Inside the palanquin, Lin Ruofu's face was filled with loathing. "I have a daughter, but I can't see her all year round. I can only occasionally catch a glimpse of her from afar at the palace banquets. Do you think it's easy for a father like me?" The eldest princess miserably explained, "This is something that can't be helped. Back then I was secretly pregnant, and I didn't have the heart to ruin your future, so I raised her alone. These years I have helped you take care of things in the palace, and secretly transferred silver from the palace treasury for you to use. Don't tell me you don't think of my kindness?" The voice in the Prime Minister's palanquin grew cold. Lin Ruofu growled in a low voice, "My future? Since then, when have I ever taken the initiative to ask for such a future? Back then I was a poor scholar, but now I have become a Prime Minister. It seems to be glorious, but I can't see my daughter. I gave birth to a son, but," he said in a trembling voice in the palanquin, "but died tragically in front of me. This is not my future what I want. This is only the power you want. You are not willing to marry a prince who will never be able to make a name for himself, and live the rest of your life in peace. Do you think I should thank you for this?" Hearing these words, the eldest princess was enraged. In a shrill voice she cried and cursed, "Lin Ruofu, things have already reached this point, yet you still say such nonsense. If you really are not satisfied, why didn't you say anything when you were transferred to the Imperial Censorate to be the Imperial Censorate? Why didn't you feel sad when you were transferred to Hanlin Academy? Why didn't you blame yourself when I helped you get the position of Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Appointments? When you were promoted step by step, you didn't remember my kindness. Now that things are not going your way, you vent all your anger on me." "Very well, Ruer." Hearing the eldest princess's voice become louder and louder, Lin Ruofu's voice calmed down. His words were filled with resentment. I would rather you be this kind of shrew than to always have that kind of sorrowful appearance. Do you know that that is very disgusting? The eldest princess was so angry that she couldn't speak. As for Chinner's marriage, I have decided. I have observed Fan Xian. No matter what kind of person he is, at least he is not someone who will die easily, Lin Ruofu said coldly. I do not wish for my daughter to become a widow. The eldest princess rebuked him. Have you lost your mind today? Gonger has just been murdered, and you are in such a hurry to win over the Fan family. Do you really believe what that old dog Chen Pingping said? Sigu Jian is a man of high status. How could he come to the capital to kill people? Perhaps Fan Jian is the mastermind behind this. Lin Ruofu said coldly, the one who died was my son. Do you think I did not go to see him for the last time? Those scars cannot be hidden. Sigu Jian's sword will is sharp but casual. Even if I am mistaken, the one in my household will not. Seeing that she could not convince him, the eldest princess's tone softened. She pleaded, wait for me to investigate. Even if you do not pity me, do not let Chenner marry into the Fan family. After a moment of silence, Lin Ruofu finally spoke. Wu Bowen suggested to me the plan to assassinate Fan Xian. I did not agree. I did not expect him to persuade the stupid Gonger. The eldest princess fell silent. She knew that it was difficult to convince him that she had nothing to do with this matter. Wu Bowen is your man. Lin Ruofu's voice was so cold that it seemed to freeze the swaying curtains of the sedan chair in the night wind. I always knew that he was one of your people, that he was someone you used to monitor me, but I never thought that my son would die because of you. So let's stop here. The night wind began to blow around the palace walls. The palanquin slowly disappeared into the darkness. A lantern fell weakly to the side of a lonely palanquin. The faint sound of a woman weeping could be heard from the palanquin. The eunuchs nervously stepped forward, and the palace maids held up lanterns. The procession slowly entered the palace through the corner gate of the palace. The palanquin traveled for a long time before arriving at Guangxing Palace, where the eldest princess was temporarily staying. The curtain was lifted, and the eldest princess stepped out, her face streaked with tears. The eunuchs and palace maids quickly lowered their heads, not daring to look up. The eldest princess weakly walked up the stone steps. Finally, she wiped away the tears on her face. Suddenly, she smiled sweetly, like a willow tree that had just shed its dew. She timidly said, kill them all. Several streaks of green light appeared. The eunuchs did not have time to beg for mercy before their throats were slit by the eldest princess palace maids with knives hidden in their sleeves. Inside the palace, the corpses fell to the ground, making a few soft sounds. The prime minister's manor was not the largest residence in the capital, but it was the wealthiest. Neither King Jing nor the wealthy Marquis Tianling could compare to the prime minister's manor. The main entrance and decorations of the prime minister's manor did not appear to be very luxurious, but those who were truly knowledgeable could tell at a glance that the furnishings within the manor had already been stripped of their splendor, leaving behind only high-class playthings. Just a few chairs could probably be replaced by King Jing's large nursery. Of course, the comparison we're making here naturally excludes His Majesty's residence. His residence is called the Imperial Palace. Who would dare to compete with him there? Lin Ruofu was able to amass so much wealth in a short span of 20 years. Everyone knew that he was greedy and crafty, but His Majesty always turned a blind eye and pretended not to see it. This was a very confusing matter. Walking through the front hall, Lin Ruofu greeted the civil officials who had come to offer their condolences. His expression was somewhat dejected as he walked into the inner residence. The officials knew that the Prime Minister was in a low mood and did not want to disturb him, so they all took their leave. Only a few officials who had urgent business to attend to waited helplessly. Lin Ruofu seemed to think of them. He walked back and asked what had happened. He forced himself to finish dealing with the matters at hand, then waved his hand weakly to let them go. When these officials left the manor, they were filled with self-blame and indescribable admiration. The Prime Minister had encountered such a calamity, yet he was still able to put public affairs first. He was truly a rare pillar of the nation. Arriving at the inner residence and entering the study, Lin Ruofu sat at the table and did not say a word for a long time. Sir, it does not seem appropriate to fall out with the Eastern Palace at this time. Yuan Hongdao, the closest friend of the Prime Minister and his most trusted advisor, brought him a cup of tea. Today Yuan Hongdao was wearing plain clothes. Seeing Lin Ruofu forcing himself to stay awake, he couldn't help but feel gloomy. Let's not talk about this for now, he said. You should go and rest first. Lin Ruofu shook his head. His wrinkles were filled with deep worry. Now that things have come to this, he said quietly, for the sake of this manor and the people of the Lin clan, I have to make a plan. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.